Good evening, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Services, Climate Change and Scrutiny Management Calling Committee. We'll be considering two calling requests this evening, one in relation to a decision on bus services and the second in relation to civic protocols. We will take one item, the civic protocols item second and the bus service issue first. We will have a break in between those two items, and we will not start the civic protocols item before 6:30. So let's see how we get on with the first part of the meeting. Just begin with some apologies. So I've had apologies from Councillor Merritt, who's substituted by Councillor Clark, from Councillor Eyre, who's substituted by Councillor Wan, Councillor Kelly, who's substituted by Councillor Rose, Councillor Myers, who's substituted by Councillor Crawshaw, Councillor Waller, who's substituted by Councillor Knight, and Councillor Widdowson, who's substituted by Councillor Fisher. So there are relatively few core members of the committee here. But for everyone else, it's either a welcome introduction or welcome return to the world of call-in meetings. I can't think of any of the housekeeping matters. Obviously, if there's a fire alarm, you know what to do. I'll start off with declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare any interest? Councillor Fisher.
A fairly spurious one, but I should declare that due to my extreme age, I do have a concessionary bus pass.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? No? Thank you. The next agenda item, we have the minutes of the 12th of February call-in meeting. Do any members have any matters of accuracy in those minutes? Obviously, anyone who was there. No, they looked fine to me. So were you happy to approve those? Yeah, super. Thank you very much. So the next agenda item is public participation. In this first part of the meeting, we'll hear from public participants who wish to speak in relation to the bus services call-in, and then when we get to the civic protocols part of the meeting, we'll hear from public speakers who wish to address that issue. We have no public speakers who wish to talk about the general remit of the committee. So we have one public speaker who wishes to speak in relation to the bus service call-in, and that is Caleb Pell, who's here in person. Would you like to come to the table, Caleb? Okay. So on the microphone box in front of you, if you press the mic button and it will come up green, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Would you like a reminder at 30 seconds?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, okay. So in your own time.
Thank you very much. I'm here to speak briefly about the effect that the proposed bus cut will have on encouraging residents back onto buses as part of the wider effort of influencing modal shift. Even in the last 18 months, I've noticed a considerable decline in service provision on many of York's bus routes. Services such as the number 11 have gone from a regular half-hourly frequency down to an unhelpful and sporadic every 50 minutes or so, and now to a bare-bones hourly service. Buses have become less predictable and, unfortunately, far less useful. The Council administration has made a bold and ambitious pledge, which I support, to reduce car journeys by 20%. But this decision seems completely contrary to that pledge. Consider people in Skelton who are at risk of losing half their buses. People will be faced with less choice of journey time, a very treacherous cycle along the A19, which I've done and not liked, or to simply take the car. Or what about residents in Cotmanthorpe, some of whom now face walking 650 metres to their nearest bus stop? This case in particular hits the vulnerable hardest. We have a council which rightly prides itself on standing up for accessibility and for disabled people, but are proposing cuts which, for the many who are not able to drive or who do not have access to a car, could have a devastating impact on their day-to-day lives. The administration has also pledged to increase bus usage by 50%. but this flies in the face of that commitment too. How do we expect people to return to the buses if there are no buses serving their bus stop, or if their frequency has been halved? Think of the impact of losing those all-important evening services on the number one, for people who might work unsociable hours, are coming back from the station, or who are simply enjoying York's excellent evening offer. This will lead to more cars on the road, breaking yet another commitment to reduce transport emissions. We understand that times are difficult for the council, but something must be done to protect these vital services. We are locking people into expensive car ownership at a time where people are facing huge increases in the cost of living. Cutting connectivity, where more people are having to travel for vital services. One situation which jumps to mind is Bishopthorpe, with residents facing regular trips to Cotmanthorpe to see a GP. Of course, the solution to this vicious cycle of decline relies on long-term solutions rather than short-term extensions and sticking plasters, but we cannot simply wait and hope that things get better. We must do something. Stop these backwards bus cuts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so there are no further public speakers for this item. So I'll briefly set out how this section of the meeting will work. In a moment, I will ask the three members who've called in the decision to address the committee and set out the reasons why they've called in this decision and why they think the core principles have been breached. And the three call-in members will have a total of 10 minutes to address the committee. Members, you will then have a total of 20 minutes to ask questions of the call-in members. The executive member, Councillor Culbane, will then be invited to address the committee in response to the alleged breaches, and he too will have 10 minutes. And then members will have the opportunity to ask questions of Councillor Culbane, and that will be for up to 20 minutes. I'll then invite the lead signatory to the call-in to come and sum up, and they will have a maximum of 5 minutes to do that. And then Councillor Culbane will have a maximum of 5 minutes to sum up as well. I'll then ask members to make any contributions they wish on the basis of the information that they've heard, and each member will have up to 5 minutes to share their thoughts, but please feel under no obligation to use all of your 5 minutes. And then we'll then take a vote where I'll ask members if they believe that the core principles have been breached or not breached. Okay, so with no further ado, I will invite the call-in members to come to the table. Just one point it's worth me reminding members is this: we're not debating or discussing whether you agree with the decision. This is a call-in on the basis of the core principles as set out in the call-in request. So whether you agree with the decision or not is not an issue we're here to discuss this evening. It's the principles underpinning the decision, and the call-in members have set out the core principles that they believe have been breached. So that's, I could ask members to focus, both call-in members and committee members, to focus on those issues in the course of this agenda item. So we're joined by Councillor Pearson, Councillor Hollier, and Councillor Stewart. You will have up to 10 minutes between the three of you to speak to your call-in request. Would you like a 1 minute warning when we get to 9 minutes, so you know you've got a minute to finish off?
I think that would be helpful, yes, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you. We might not take that long.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Thank you all for hearing this calling in request about the decision on the bus network review tonight. I was pleased to have this calling in request backed by my ward colleague, Councillor Hollier, and also received cross-party support from Councillor Stewart. I'd like to note that this call-in has also received support from the York Bus Forum and the York Civic Trust, who are also very much against these proposals. I thank the public speaker and the Bus Forum for their written contributions, and I'd also note and thank the Haxby Town Council statement that was made a few weeks ago regarding this decision. It may not surprise members that it is councillors from Haxby and Wigginton and Cotmanthorpe making this call-in request, since the number 13 bus service is one of the worst affected routes by this decision. However, I hope I can impress upon you this evening that the impact of the network review decision will be felt in all wards and by many different residents citywide, since it will not only changes to bus routes and reductions to frequencies across all wards, but particularly reductions in outer wards where car ownership is higher will only increase traffic congestion and pollution in central wards. As a transport planner by training and profession, I could talk about the impacts to people and places of adequate and inadequate bus timetables and frequencies. However, the nature of this call-in is about how the decision was made. And so tonight I will focus on explaining the specific reasons why this decision should be referred back to the executive for a bit of a rethink. I will endeavour firstly to explain to members why the decision is contrary to the council's policy framework. So the council executive rushed through this decision on the bus network review. It will slash services across the city, making some journeys impossible. The changes proposed to the service 1, 13 and 14 in my ward, for instance, would reduce service frequencies and create gaps in the timetable, which would make the bus less attractive to new and existing bus users. This is completely contrary to the council plan and the four initiatives within the council plan. And of course, the council's stated objective to increase bus patronage by 50%. And as the member of public noted, the reduction in car usage by 20%. Policy area 4.1 of the York Local Transport Strategy states that City of York Council will work with bus operators to create a comprehensive network of bus services accessible to as many residents and visitors as possible, and providing services at weekends for the nighttime economy. It goes on to state it will ensure all low-income areas are appropriately covered, and these proposals, as the Bus Forum note, run contrary to that aim and affect areas such as Acomb adversely, which is one of the most deprived wards in the city. Secondly, I will attempt to explain why the decision did not follow the principles of good decision-making as set out in Article 7 of the Council's Constitution, which the first one is about meaningfully considering all alternatives and where reasonably possible, considering the views of the public. It is crucial that the local bus timetable offers regular and reliable opportunity to travel, connecting residents to key services such as the local doctors and dentists, as well as amenities like shops and supermarkets. This needs to be at the times they want to travel. Additionally, it is important that bus connections to places like schools and colleges like Huntington and York College are maintained for pupils and students who are unable to drive because they're too young to drive. It is clear from reading the consultation responses and the report back that none of these views have been taken into consideration and none of these essential links have been considered. Merely listing the responses does not mean you have considered the views. Note that over 50% of respondents stated that they would use the bus less if these changes were implemented. And the second bit is around taking account of all matters, both general and specific, and ignore any irrelevant matters. And there are about 5 things which I feel are irrelevant, which were not duly taken into account. Firstly, the loss of dial and ride services. This material change should have been taken into account with services retained until a replacement for this service is introduced. The government's long-term vision for bus service improvement, which is required by the 12th of June, in just 12 weeks' time. This vision needs to be drawn up by City of York. It's a very relevant and very specific matter which should have been taken into consideration and services retained until this vision has been prepared. 3, there was no clear information regarding the objectives and impacts of the proposal. 4, the Enhanced Partnership Forum was not consulted prior to the consultation deadline. And 5, it was impossible to fully understand the process without the information and criteria for the economic impact of route subsidies. So in conclusion, I feel that the executive made this decision without a full assessment of the impact and without identifying mitigation measures to address these issues of connectivity, which provide a lifeline for many of our poorest and most vulnerable residents. This is not demonstrative of an administration which purports to care in a crisis. Lib Dems are willing to work with all parties and call on the bus operators and the council to think again and to work closely together to ensure the council can meet its own objectives to increase bus patronage, i.e. bus usage, by 50% by 2030. And I'd just like to finish by saying that we've consulted the Liberal Democrat mayoral candidate and she has confirmed that she would reinstate these bus cuts if elected. And I'll hand over to Councillor Stewart.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think Councillor Pearson set out the case extremely well for why this decision is inherently flawed in the way it's been taken, as well as the decision itself, although I'm aware we must major on the first aspect. The timing of the review was totally unacceptable. Christmas, New Year, when I heard there was something bus related to consult on, when I heard about it, I was amazed that it was actually being initiated at that point. Totally unfair to start it at that point. As Councillor Pearson has said, noting comments does not show you've taken account of comments, and the strength of feeling, the numbers of people against these proposals, which is, massive numbers, really significant numbers given when the consultation was, really show how damning they are. Also, the council's each priorities, we can write them in a report, but clearly they've not been stuck to in the slightest on this. In Copmanthorpe, for example, the removal of the Flaxman Loop will mean people have a near 1 kilometre walk to a bus stop. Now that's either means you have a near 1 kilometre walk for the fun of it because you can, or it means you can't and you don't, and you can't make that journey. Totally flawed. And also in Copmanthorpe, it was all about the journeys being, let's get people into the city rather than a lot of people actually take that bus to get to the doctors. So totally flawed on that. And as Councillor Pearson just touched on, with Dial-A-Ride failing at the same time, it's incredible the council went ahead with this. We've always been told with buses, if you can't do a bus in the normal way, Dial-A-Ride is an option there, but unfortunately that has collapsed just at the time. In terms of the review itself, I would argue it didn't look in sufficient detail at the real issues about buses and why people get them and ensuring that people can get where they want, how they want. The review basically looks at the numbers of people getting on a stop, and I would say that by making the changes they have done, if as proposed, it's going to significantly reduce bus usage for a number of users, which is totally at odds with the local transport strategy that's being consulted on at the time. So to make these cuts when that was being consulted on just seems absolutely incredible. And just finally, I think the point I would major on is the fact that we've had these decisions taken. There has been a game-changing bit of information in that one of the mayoral candidates has said they would reverse these cuts if imposed, and now two mayoral candidates have said they would also do the same. A third mayoral candidate, as far as I'm aware, is going to try and get through the whole election without having any policies at all, and maybe a fourth one, we'll see. But the simple facts are that given the strong likelihood of people that have declared they would reverse this policy being elected the mayor, to go ahead with this decision, given the flaws in how it's been taken, would seem utterly ludicrous and would basically amount to we will cut buses in York for a month before they're reinstated. Can you think of any more stupid way to go about bus travel in this city with all the confusion people face than we'll cut the buses for a month and then somebody else will probably reinstate them a month later? When people need reliability, they need to know when buses are coming. That's why we should be revisiting this decision in terms of the flaws in the process, the failure to treat people equally, the failure to consider all communities, and that will give the time in referring it back for executives to take a different decision based on the information that's available.
So this is your 1 minute and 20-second warning.
Thanks, Chair. Really, I just wanted to use up the remaining time just to talk a bit about that consultation process. As members will be aware, it began on the 21st of December, which is obviously, basically Christmas, and that takes out a good, week until the new year. The proposals that were actually published were themselves the result of a behind closed doors exercise, which residents and councillors were not able to feed into. And that's despite requests from a number of councillors over a long period of time to see what the thinking was and to try and get involved in that process. The consultation was released without the network review report, which was only published later with the agenda papers, and that makes it very difficult for residents to have engaged properly in that process. Obviously, initially, the Labour administration said that the final recommendations would be published on the 17th of January in a report that would go to the executive meeting on the 25th of January. And that's from a consultation started on the 21st of December. That's giving just 2 weeks, taking account of Christmas and New Year, and basically no time at all for public involvement. Obviously, in addition, with the consultation closing on the 17th of January, that meant that there would not be any time for the feedback to be compiled and properly, included into the report itself.
Could draw your remarks to a close.
Same day. This in itself demonstrates the lack of intent to engage with residents. So following pressure from Lib Dem councillors, decision was at least put back by a few weeks. But for something as important to so many people as local bus services, still unacceptably short.
Thank
We
you.
tried our
Councillor
best,
Hollier.
but here we are.
Thank you. Okay, so members have heard from the call-in members, so now we have 20 minutes during which members can ask questions of any or all of the call-in members on what they've heard. Who would like to start? Anticipation. I'll ask the first question if nobody else wants to. You mentioned that the explicit mention was made of Haxby and Cotmanthorpe. Obviously, the proposals relate to a number of areas. On the issue of consultation, are you aware of any formal consultation with either the Haxby Town Council or Cotmanthorpe Parish Council as maybe not statutory consultees, but was either parish council formally notified and invited to comment on the proposals? If you may or may not be aware. I was wondering if you were aware of anything.
Not to my knowledge, no. It was myself who brought it to the attention of Haxby Town Council colleagues. I don't know about Cotmanthorpe.
Yeah, I'm also Cotmanthorpe Parish Councillor, and there was no consultation with Cotmanthorpe Parish Council, and it fell to me as the ward councillor to try and raise as much awareness of the consultation and the cuts as possible. And obviously, a number of residents did raise the seeming anomaly of a consultation on a council transport plan, seeking to see a 50% increase in bus use just at the time that buses were being cut.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. On that last point, Councillor Stewart, do you not think there might be some logic in saying that without adjusting how these services work and are funded might help their longevity, and therefore that could support more bus use moving forward rather than not changing services and then seeing even worse decisions having to be made further down the line?
Yeah, I mean, I do very much agree with the fact that your bus subsidies shouldn't work as they have done for years, and we do need to look at a more overall change, and that is definitely one of the ways to further bus usage. You're absolutely right. But the point is exactly on how this was done, that I do not believe this has the broad look that is needed. The timing of the consultation as it was, for me, it really didn't go to the heart of who wants to be able to get a bus, where do they want to be able to go, and making that possible for them. We really don't have that. And I think if we looked at the decision in a sort of more sensible time frame, and for example, even without two mayoral candidates pledging they'd reverse the cuts, knowing full well in May we're going to have a new mayor, whoever they may be, and transport is going to be a massive part of that. And for me, we want to approach that mayoral battle saying to the mayors, what will you do for York? And then to the mayor with the transport powers, how will this help when they're elected? To say, well, we're not going to have that bus, we're not going to have that bus, and it just seems we're going in from a position of real weakness. So we do need to have that broader look, but this isn't facilitating that.
Councillor Taylor, you had a supplementary.
Yeah, it is a supplementary, but it does stand alone at the same time. Is that all right, Chair?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry for being late as well.
So,
To be honest with you, I would agree that the timing of the consultation wasn't ideal. As a ward councillor, it caught me on the hop over the Christmas period and the winter period. It's awkward. Having said that, I was actually surprised at the sort of figures given on the respondents. So around 50% of the respondents are over the age of 65. And generally speaking, that would be my main sort of group of concern, especially with so many of these things being online. It actually looks like older residents are arguably overrepresented in this consultation. So one thing I'm curious to hear is how much consultation would have been enough in your view? Would another 2 weeks have dealt with this concern, or would another month have done the job? Genuine question, because I'm not sure where you draw the line.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for me, it's not particularly the length of the consultation, it's where the consultation started in terms of being at Christmas time and why we'd want to start this review at this point without it being cross-party. For me, when we've got committees such as the one very ably chaired by yourself, Councillor Taylor, to look at transport matters, those committees should have been involved in that at the outset. So for me, that was the flaw. In terms of the age of respondents, I think the age of respondents to a survey is naturally going to be older in terms of those people have the time, those people are probably more likely to take the bus and all those sort of things. So I wouldn't worry particularly about the age of people, except to show that, you know, obviously a lot of those people, in particularly in Copland Thorpe, for example, are the very people who would really need that bus. So, and I was, you know, I raised awareness of this issue by doing a leaflet, you know, to tell people about what was going on. And I had a call from someone who was 90 something, and they were saying, look, without this bus, I, you know, wouldn't be able to get to doctors. So real genuine sort of issues. And there were people that were getting their relatives to submit views, and people saying, well, can we make it aware, people aware that there's forms in, you know, physical locations and stuff like that. So people did try and raise awareness of things.
Okay. Do you want to add anything, Councillor Pearson?
Yeah, just to take both of those questions, if I may. In terms of the timing of the consultation, obviously it was doing concurrently with the local transport plan consultation, and it would make more sense to me to actually wait for that consultation to finish. And then perhaps you can use the responses from that consultation, particularly around bus services, to then feed into your network review, to then do a consultation specifically on bus services. The order is completely illogical. Additionally, you had this point around the government's long-term vision, which has been requested by the 12th of June. And again, if we're doing a piece to fit into that, again, it makes sense to wait until you've decided what your long-term vision is. And the third thing regarding sort of like the long-term focus of the services, things like Haxby Station, which will form a key part of the local transport plan, the number 13 bus service, which is proposed to be slashed in half, is the ideal service to extend to Haxby Station and onto Strensall. So I made this point at the executive decision meeting, but it seems to have been ignored.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of quick points and then a sort of more general one, because there was a few things that were said within the three contributions there. Councillor Stewart, you said that people in Copland Thorpe would have to walk 1 kilometre to the nearest bus stop, and I believe it's 650 metres, which is half a kilometre or just a bit over. Obviously, that is still a significantly long way, but I think we do need to be careful that we're not being overly alarmist about the changes. And the officer that's compiled the report and has responded to questions is suggesting that actually that's the only part of the network change where there's a significant change to the distance from the nearest bus stop. So I think we just need to get a bit of context there. Noted the comments around the schools and actually welcome the review and the changes to the number 11, which enables Millthorpe School to pupils to have better access. So, you know, hopefully there will be opportunities if there are things that are wrong within the current timetable that are causing problems for schools, because again, I don't think anybody would want anybody to not be able to access school. But in general terms, it does seem to me that the way that you're framing this is as if this is a root and branch review of the entire network of buses and looking at how buses should operate in the entire city across the piece in relation to everything else, which is obviously what the local transport strategy is about doing. This is about saying we've got a pot of money available. The operators are telling us that they can deliver this amount of service, and this is how we use the money that we've got. Now, I think we'd probably all of us around the table like to see a massively enhanced bus service in the city, but are you not conflating two different things here?
Who'd like to have a go at that?
Thank you. On the first point, I mean, I'm happy to walk around Flaxman Croft with Councillor Crawshaw. He can tell residents that they might have to walk 625 metres to the bus stop. I can tell residents they might have to walk nearly 1 kilometre. I don't think the reaction I get will be any better or worse than Councillor Crawshaw. 625 metres is a totally unacceptable distance for somebody to have to walk for a bus stop if we as a council want to encourage bus travel, and it is a totally impossible distance for many people to walk. In terms of is this not a broader strategy? For me, that is the actual problem. So it's not a sort of get out for the call-in, that this is meant to be a broader strategy. It's the fact we shouldn't be doing these cuts now with everything that's going on, especially the mayoral candidacy in May without having a broader strategy. Just to chop a few bits off sends entirely the wrong message to people in York about getting buses, and it also sends entirely the wrong message to government about the likes of bus funding and everything like that. And that's one of the points that's been made. I think it was in the Civic Trust submission very well.
Councillor Pearson.
I just want to add, I double checked with the Section 151 officer earlier today to ask, we have not budgeted for any bus savings this year, so we don't need to make this saving.
Okay, thank you. I think from reading the report, I think it did make reference to anticipated increase in the cost of running some other subsidised services, but I'm sure when the executive member speaks, he might want to address that point. Is there a supplementary?
Yeah, it's just on that point really. The report does make clear that some of the operators are saying that they are loss making and that they aren't able to sustain at this current level. So the idea that, first of all, it's a saving for the council, I don't think it is. There's a pot of money that's available. It's how that money is allocated. But actually this notion that you can knock it on because it's not nice to have a bus service. Nobody wants to make a reduced bus service. But if your choice is a reduced bus service or no bus service at all, which seems to be what the operators are saying, then surely it's quite rational to say, right, actually, we've got this amount of money. What's the least worst option? And as I say, I'm sure the exec member will come and tell you that this is a least worst option, not something that anybody's, jumping up and down about.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if Councillor Crawshaw feels it's a choice between these cuts and no bus service at all, I would like to have a game of poker with Councillor Crawshaw, because these highly profitable bus companies, I think, have had Councillor Crawshaw over. So really, it's about what cuts we have to make when we have to make them. And I'd also argue they're flawed. So in Cotmanthorpe, as I understand it, Connections' view is basically people will get their next nearest Connections bus stop on Top Lane, whereas they won't. They'll actually be less likely to take a bus trip, or people will go on the coastliner. So these are the flaws in the whole decision making.
So I've got a supplementary from Councillor Healy, and then I'll bring you in, Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair.
Just turn your microphone on.
Thank you, Chair. Having delivered many a leaflet around Flaxman Croft, I would imagine what the officer's done is he's gone bus stop to bus stop. What he hasn't gone is gone to the furthest point of Flaxman Croft and its little off streets to a bus stop to a bus stop. And if you look at a map, I'll be very surprised and Councillor Stewart can pick me up on this, Learman's Way, I think, is the furthest point up to Top Lane. I'll be very surprised if that's 350 metres.
Okay. So, Councillor Pearson, did you want to respond to Councillor Crawshaw's last point?
It was, yeah, just around bus subsidy. Now it's quite easy to think of a route, or particularly like a route extension like the bit to Tower Court Road, which particularly affects the number 13. Quite easy to think, oh, there's only so many people on that, and therefore we're subsidising them to the tune of X pounds per day, and that might seem totally unreasonable to continue. But if the option to mitigate that is to take a service away from another part of the town to then serve that part of town, you are robbing Peter to pay Paul, and a profitable bus service is getting absolutely slashed. And it's gone from a very turn up and go timetable of every 15 minutes to potentially having half-hour gaps in there, which is not a usable timetable, particularly for the sort of Wigginton, Towerthorpe Road end of Haxby and Wigginton, where you are travelling the longest distance to get into town, and therefore the car is very attractive. And if you're trying to keep people out of the cars and get people onto the buses, you need to keep those frequencies high.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. It's just coming back to the consultation that was done. So I have a couple of questions really. One is the responses that we've had sight of. Is there anything? When I phrase this question, I don't mean to say that there are non-meaningful comments, but is there anything meaningful in the responses that you feel the executive may well have overlooked? And then the second part of the question is, Councillor Taylor quite rightly said that over 50% of the respondents are kind of over 65. The timing of the consultation probably excluded some 25,000 population of the city in the student body that may or may not be affected by these changes. And could that have made any significant difference to the responses? Thank you, Chair.
Who'd like to have a go at that?
Can you just briefly summarise your question again? Sorry.
I thought it was pretty clear, but there we go. It was in two parts really. So is there anything meaningful in the responses that you've looked at that you think the executive have overlooked? Because and secondly, as Councillor Taylor quite rightly said, over 50% of the responses are over 65, but actually there is a body of bus users who are the student population of the city, who because of the timing of the consultation wouldn't have been consulted, because the majority of them wouldn't have been in York at the time. Would that have made a significant difference?
I think quite probably. I think we've heard from a public speaker who I believe is a student. So yeah, I think we would have got a better response from student population if the timing had been during term time, during work time. With regards to specific responses, I will be perfectly honest, I haven't read every single response, but the ones that I have looked at, there are some incredibly nerdy, transporty people in York, and I love them to pieces. They provided a whole load of information around the impacts on timetables, which seems to have been completely omitted from the report. And when items in the report said, oh, this is just a route change, there was no recognition that changing the route changes the timetable, and that's the big impact that I feel was missing.
Councillor Stewart?
Yeah, I think in terms of if I was doing a bus consultation, the first place I would look for a response would probably be the York Bus Forum. Wouldn't be rocket science to go to them. They slate it. They slate the consultation. Second place I'd probably look is the York Civic Trust, who are doing more and more on transport, and Tony May of the Civic Trust, who is very involved with the council on transport. They slate it. And the third thing I'd look for is the way that the most vulnerable groups like disabled and the older people have articulated their concerns. And they have articulated their concerns and been ignored. It's like two foxes and a chicken voting on what to have for dinner. It's a consultation, but we know the outcome.
Councillor Hollier?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, the reason you start a consultation on the 21st of December is because you don't want people to reply. That is not a point at which you start a consultation if you're wanting a lot of public involvement. So I think that's the starting point. We've got to, recognise that reality. In terms of issues that people will have picked up in the consultation, I think for me, one of the bigger ones was not understanding that you can just, the 13 goes from the West Knucks loop, but we can replace that with the number 1. Yes, there's still a bus going round there, but the destination of that bus is different. And so what people were using the number 13 for, they now can't use or do anymore, because the number 1 goes, it's very good if you want to go to the theatre or the station, but not very good if you want to go to the other end of town, which is where a lot more of the people that were using that bus were going. So I think there's a misunderstanding of, you can't just swap in.
Yeah. Got 2 minutes left, and I'm going to ask Councillor Rose, because he hasn't asked a question yet. Quickly, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. All it is really is just a comment that we just have to be very careful of the language that we use to presume that a timing of a particular consultation was to not have a response, I think isn't helpful to the conversation. Just to mention that.
A quick supplementary, Councillor Taylor.
I was going to say the exact same thing.
Okay. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, quick clarity question, then a broader question. The first one is, I didn't catch in your speech, Ed, when you said there was no clear information about something. I didn't catch what specifically you said there wasn't clear information about. Could I just get that again, if that's all right?
I think it goes to that point I've just said about the residents who noticed that, well, if you're changing a route from here to there, you're changing the timetable as well. And that's the bit where the clear information around objectives and impact were not fully spelt out in the executive report.
And I guess the point I would say more generally is, I think there's a difference between the decision quality and the decision outcome, whether you agree with the decision or whether you think the decision was made well. And I think the question around clear information, we've got hundreds of pages of stuff here. I guess your perspective would be that they did have that information, even if it wasn't codified in that document. The phrase rush through as well. It was 4 weeks, I think, the consultation end to end. So the timing might not have been ideal around Christmas, certainly agree. But if the alternative is trying to fit it into budget season and just starting it a week later, there might be some comms benefits in that, but you're losing that time. And I think rush through might be the wrong wording on it. I just wanted to make that point around, we're trying to make sure that
this is asking the colleague members to respond to those comments.
the specific question is, do you think that rush through is the right phrase when the timeline was longer, as opposed to the concern that you're raising around it being the least way of getting, it's not the best time frame for getting lots of responses. That's the specific one. And ditto with council plan.
Right, we're now at 20 minutes. So
Appreciate.
if I can stop there and ask colleague members to answer that question.
Yeah,
so we won't have time.
and the last bit of the same thing was just the council plan. Obviously, all cuts, £40 million of cuts, is not in the best interest of the principles of the council plan. Do you not think that this is in line with the other cuts that are being made, as good as can be made with the money that we have available?
So very quickly, on that very last point, obviously I've made the point already, this saving is not identified in the budget, so we don't need to make this saving. With regards to the consultation, yes, it was rushed. It didn't need to start before Christmas. The decision session for the executive was pushed back another 4 weeks after pressing from Lib Dem councillors. And as I've already said in this meeting, it would have been better to finish the local transport plan consultation and then use the information, the vast information you've got from that consultation to feed into a bus network review. And that would have been a much more logical, much more sensible way to approach like a genuine review of the network. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, calling members. You may return to the public gallery. Thank you. Invite Councillor Kilbane to join us at the table, please. Okay, welcome. There you go. Welcome, Councillor Kilbane. You have up to 10 minutes to respond to the call-in request. So, in your own time.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Chair. And I also have officers here who can answer any of the technical detail about dates and routes and all the rest of it. And I'm sure they'll be happy to provide any information that the committee needs. I think a little bit sad to be here today, really, because the decision that we had to make as part of the bus service network review was a pretty tough decision, as most of the decisions that we've had to make since we came into administration have been. But sad to be here today, really, because my feeling, having listened to the call-in, is that actually this is more about election campaign leaflets than actually the decision that was made as to the bus service network review. So, as most people around this table will know, the member of the public who's speaking here tonight is a long-standing Liberal Democrat activist, organiser and sometime candidate, maybe practising for the next election campaign. Should have been better informed by his colleagues in the Liberal Democrats that the number 11 is actually a commercial service. So it's not one that we have any control of, except for outside of after 7 o'clock on an evening where the subsidy kicks in. And actually, if this was a serious call in about how these decisions are made, then the Liberal Democrats would have understood how contracting for bus services in the city work, and they would have known, given that they were in administration for the previous 8 years, that actually those contracts need to be renewed in a timely manner. And those contracts were up for renewal in April of this year. And that means that we needed to be having talks as early as possible with the bus companies to get the best result that we could for the residents of York from the companies. So The idea that we could just put this off until we've been through this consultation and that consultation is strictly for the birds. That's not the way that these services operate. It's not the way that the contracts operate. And if this was a serious call-in, then those taking that call-in would have known that before questioning the time schedules that they have been questioning tonight, because they know that the time schedules that they are suggesting just simply wouldn't work, and we would have ended up with no bus services being provided to all of the services that we have to subsidise. We would have ended up lurching from crisis to crisis on individual bus routes, which I think, if we can remember, was actually what happened under the last Liberal Democrat administration. There seemed to be a crisis every other month in terms of some bus service here or there coming to an end, with petitions circulating, often Liberal Democrat members petitioning their own administration over bus services. What we inherited was a total and utter mess, because it had been run on an ad hoc way at the behest of the Liberal Democrats that were then in power. So what I said to the team is that we need to stabilise the network, because what will get people back onto buses is a reliable and stable network. So the purpose of the bus service review was to stabilise the network. Now, it's also been conflated here tonight that it had something to do with the local transport draft strategy, whereas actually, you know, the local transport draft strategy is a separate thing to the bus service network review, which is about what buses can we afford to carry on subsidising, and what's that network going to look like for the next year or 2 years. At no point was the bus service network review about increasing passenger numbers. It was about trying to stabilise the pretty poor service that we had inherited, and trying to make sure that we could build up again from a reliable base that network. Now, as part of that process, we did need to get out to consultation, and just in the week running up to the 21st, when the consultation was launched, the poor officer that was trying to pull all the information together to get it out to consultation was pulling her hair out, because there was lots of technical detail that she was struggling to get hold of, and she didn't want to release the consultation until the information was there so people could be properly informed. And she was in such a state with it that I actually said to her, look, forget about it, you know, just leave it till after Christmas. We'll have to look at what we do with the dates after Christmas, because I didn't think it was having a very good impact on her health, actually, trying to get this consultation out in time. However, being the professional that she is, and she was great when she was working for us, she was determined to get this consultation out with as much time as possible for people to look at it, because that she believed in doing her job properly. So I take great resentment at Councillor Hollier's disgraceful comment that this was somehow out there to hoodwink the public, when actually this was an officer doing their damnedest to get the information out there so that the public could be consulted. And they were, weren't they? Because there's 1,100 people responded to it, which is a huge amount of response for this type of consultation. Well, it doesn't work on pursuit. Councillor Fisher, I mean, if you want to go on the stage, then I suggest you join the Light Operatic Society, because, you know, it's a huge amount of respondents. It's I'm not here to ask questions. Please. It's a huge amount for this type of consultation. It's almost the same as we've had for the entire draft local transport strategy. So, you know, consultation did happen. I've talked to the bus forum. And they now understand our cross purposes. They feel as though they were properly consulted individually. They were consulted as part of the enhanced partnership. And yes, maybe we should have gone that step further and talked to them individually. However, they were consulted. You know, the residents of Flaxman, as well as receiving the very interesting Conservative leaflets, were also individually written to. So there was 500 individual letters went out to those residents who were most directly affected, to make sure that they did have their input into the decisions as it was being made. I personally spoke to 2 residents of Flaxman Court at one of the drop-ins that was organised to consult on this in the centre of town, and they are really badly affected by these cuts, for sure. you know, whether that's 650 metres or 3 miles or whatever it was, Councillor Stewart was saying, then, you know, the bottom line is that they are really badly affected by this cut, because that bus was a lifeline for them, which is why we've asked to look at, you know, what can we do in terms of dial-a-ride. The dial-a-ride thing happening at the same time was totally separate and extremely unfortunate. Well, extremely unfortunate for York Wales, the situation that they found themselves in. But we needed to make decisions as to what we could get bus companies to deliver as of next April in a stable way, so that everybody knows what they're getting. The aim of the local of the transport strategy is to increase bus patronage. This is the base that we are going to build that from, and that is about targeting the people who most need it. But until we've made York a viable place for bus operators to be, either through franchising, through enhanced plus partnerships, or whatever we've got, until we've made it a place where the bus operators are properly cross-subsidising some routes, then we're going to be in this position, and that's what we're trying to get to. So what we've established here is essentially a baseline that we can work up from. Yes, there have been some cuts. I think the word slash was probably you know, a little bit extreme. Chopping parts off the route is actually what's happened. But you know, the harsh reality of this is that we do subsidise the buses on a passenger basis, and it's £6.40 rural and £3.40, I think, within the city. On the Flaxman Court Loop, it was costing up to £15 per passenger for that bus in subsidy. And as it said in the report, which was based on the advice of the Section 151 officer, it's not viable in the long term to keep on paying that out. Now, in terms of the cuts, the savings, we're having to make the money go further that we've got, because the costs have gone through the roof for the bus operating companies. That's both in terms of the fuel, but also for drivers, because there is such a lack of drivers, and the bus companies are responding to that. But some routes will always be non-commercial. I mean, we're pulling out all the stops here to maintain the 13 at all. You know, not just about cutting out, because it doesn't make a lot of
30
money.
seconds.
So, you know, we are constantly trying to square this circle of trying to deliver a service with commercial companies who are in it for a profit. You know, and that's what we're trying to do. We're squaring it as best as we can. This is gives us some certainty and stability for the next year or so, while we bring in measures that will actually make bus operators a far more attractive place to be in York.
Thank you, Councillor Kilbane. So we now move to question and answer session for up to 20 minutes. So I'll sort Councillor Healy first, and then I'll write on everyone else.
Invite the knowledgeable officer to join the executive member.
I think that's a very good idea, Councillor Healy.
So just clarify, the officers are there to support the executive member. So if there's a
the question,
if there's a question, that's fine.
I'll get the more contentious parts over with first. I think Councillor Stewart mentioned a figure of 1 kilometre, not 3 miles. Just under 1 kilometre. So I know you're prone to a quite ebullient form of speaking, but that was, even for you, that was good. So first question is, your £15 per passenger subsidy on Flaxman Croft. Could you tell me where that comes from?
It's £450, which it costs to run the service, divided by 30, the people who are using it.
So you're assigning the entire cost of one bus to those 30 people?
I think I said up to. I mean, I think it averages at about £10 per person.
Well, no, I can see where you got the figure from. It's page 26.53. One bus per day is 450. So dropping from 4 buses to 3, you get all of that saving from cutting off what is probably a 5-minute loop. And you're quite happy to assign all of that cost to that loop. Hence the reason I asked.
Yeah, no, I understand that. It's an illustration of what it can cost us up to, depending on how many people are using it on a particular day. But I think, if memory serves me right, and officers might be able to correct me, I think it does cost around about £10 per passenger on average. I think.
Okay,
Okay,
yeah, I'll come back later.
I mean, you know, don't forget also that a lot of the passengers who are using buses, quite rightly, are on concessionary fares. And in terms of the bus operating companies, the money that they get for the concessionary fare is less as well. So it all becomes very difficult. It's very difficult to maintain commercial services in places where buses are infrequently used. But of course, we all want to run buses to places that are that have infrequent use because they're a lifeline for people. We know that. I mean, I think as Councillor Crawshaw said, you know, if we all want a great bus network and a great bus service that tackles social isolation, that picks up all the people that we want to get picked up and takes them to where they want to be. But the way the bus service is run in the UK, that's simply not funded. We have to try and stretch the money that we've got as far as we can, and that's what the bus network review has done. At the same time, stabilising the network, so we're not constantly seeing Liberal Democrat councillors in the newspaper with a petition to save this and save that.
That's all, what's supplemental on his second part?
I'll
I'll come back later.
one quick. So in terms of concessionary fares, you said that the bus operators get a lower revenue, but isn't that topped up by funding the council gets from government to passport through to the operators? I don't know how that works.
I think you're probably veering in the technical there. So the government doesn't give us money for concessionary fares. It used to, but it doesn't anymore. But yes, where a concessionary fare is taken, the council tops that up. And just going back to the bus subsidy question on page number 244, you can see that the 13 is a commercial service apart from the West Nooks terminus at Haxby and the Horseman Ave Loop at Cottonthorpe, and the bus subsidy for all the bus routes is listed out on that table there.
Thank you. I'll come back to you later, Councillor Healy, but other hands. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously, you just repeated the point I made already, you know, everybody around the table will be falling over themselves to talk about how important a bus service is and how we would all like to see a fantastically well-used bus service in York. But we've got to focus on how this decision has been made and how the decision was reached. And there's a number of points that have been challenged on the call-in. So I just wondered if specifically you could just talk for a moment about the ways in which you meaningfully considered all alternatives and where reasonably possible have considered the views of the public. And then also what relevant matters in general and specific you've taken into account in reaching your decision.
So when the initial, So obviously we the review itself was done by consultants. That then came back to officers for a discussion based upon their findings. We had to take as our guidance the figures that had previously been agreed for how much we would cross-subsidise bus routes. And that was based upon, you know, that I can't remember the precise figures, but £6.40 in rural and £3.40 within the city, I think. But also on patronage, so there needs to be at least 8 users per hour for that particular service, and that essentially guided the decision-making process around our thoughts on what the consultants were telling us. So we followed that policy of the council. And that then identified the Flaxman Loop and the West Nooks that were not viable on that, based upon that calculation. So that is what we then went out to consultation on. I think York Wheels having to cease the dial-a-ride service at the time was very unfortunate, because it meant that they would normally be the people that we'd be looking to pick that up. But at no point through any of the consultations or with any of the partners that we talked to, did we find a way where we could bring those back into sort of commercial operation. I need to be sort of careful in terms of talking about commercial sensitivities around some of the routes, because the actual threat has been that some of those services and some of those routes stopped altogether. And that is what we were trying to preserve. And there are some routes that and services that we've currently got that we might not have had it not been for the willingness of bus companies to run them, and without getting into sort of commercial reality for some of them. So, and then it was out to consultation. We were, like I say, we wrote to the people in Flaxman Court who were the most affected on that loop. We spoke with them at drop-ins. We extended the consultation period when we were asked to do so. We organised drop-ins for ward councillors who could come and tell us their views, and we could then consider them. And hopefully the ward councillors all talk to their residents. We wrote to all of the key stakeholders, so that's through the enhanced partnerships for all the key stakeholders who most be affected. But you know, the bottom line is, through all of those consultations, we found no way of getting the costs of keeping those services in line with what the council policy is on subsidising bus services.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Gilbert, you seem very, very proud of the fact that 1,100 people had engaged with the online on purpose paper survey. Could I point out the population of York is 202,000? That means you actually got responses from 0.54% of the population of York. And if you take the adult population has been about 107,000, it's round about 1%. Do you think that is actually a satisfactory response level? It's less than 1,100 people is less than most non-league football teams get their football matches.
I'm not sure what level of non-league you're watching, but Northern Premier League, you'd be quite happy with 1,100 in the ground, actually. So I think proud is not exactly the word that I would use to describe it. However, it was a very satisfactory response for this type of survey where you don't normally get that level. So I don't know if officers have got any sort of figures on as to how many people normally respond to these surveys, but if you look at the local transport survey, which is for all transport across the whole of York, we've had 1,100 written responses. And I think I'm not trying to claim credit for this at all. I mean, I'm sure a lot of it was down to the ward councillors getting out there and saying to their residents, look, this consultation is happening. I think you should respond, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why we got quite a good response to it, which is what we want. The problem that we've got is that none of those responses have solved the dilemma of how do we provide a service that's not profitable using companies that want to make a profit.
Thank you.
Sorry, we've got a bit of technical information here.
I was just going to say, I mean, in terms of the level of response to the consultation, then we would consider that that's been a reasonable return, in that we have engaged with the public and we have got a level of response that you would expect by sort of statistical evaluation. I think the key is, we are working in an environment where we've got a lot of commercial services, but we've also got the subsidised services which the council provide where they see a need, where a commercial operator isn't prepared to operate on a commercial basis. I think had we have not received the BSIP funding, which we received from the government in late 2022, we would be looking at a very different scenario in terms of buses in the city now. What officers have sought to do, and working with the members, is to, through the enhanced bus partnership, is to stabilise the network. The funding that we've received through BSIP, we've been using to, in part, support the services that we have to date, and a part of that has gone to supporting the 13 to date, where the operator was previously looking to remove parts of that service. The key is that the more we take from the BSIP to support services through the subsidy, the less we have to go with the other initiatives that we want to promote about growing the network. So there is a bit of a conundrum that you have to solve in terms of the initiatives, in terms of fare support, about making the services more reliable through capital interventions and infrastructure interventions on the network, and about how much you're going to put in terms of supporting the network while you're going through that process. So there is a conundrum there that needs to be addressed.
Okay, got a couple of supplementary questions following on from that. Councillor Rowley, then Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for been with this evening, Councillor Cobain, and your explanations. Just a couple of things that are supplementary on the question there. In the wider scheme of things, if 11,000 responses are deemed to be a good response, then 11,000 would be great. 1,100 is we don't need to split hairs whether it's good or bad, and I think we're going to digressing a little bit. What I would like to ask is the responses that you had, and also your consultation with the residents in the Flaxman Loop area. In what way did those responses and your conversations that you had and discussions with the residents of the Flaxman's Loop influence the decisions that you ultimately made? Did they in any way?
I mean, they certainly did, in the sense that we have never, for a second, pretended that this was good. You know, those residents need to have a bus service, and part of the thing that we need to work out from here is how do we get a bus service to those people, and whether that's a new dialer ride, or whether or not we can post the mayor arriving direct buses down there through franchising. You know, we have to work out a way of making a commercial business provide a non-commercial service. You know, all local authorities outside of London are doing that, you know, to a greater or lesser extent. So what I'm saying to you, Councillor Rowley, is that they affected us because we knew that those people need that service, but it was financially, it's not viable following the policies that we've applied to the BSIP funding for subsidising bus services, based upon trying to resolve this conundrum of we could spend all the BSIP money on subsidising buses, but absolutely nothing else on the whole network would improve. There'd be no new information boards, there'd be no new bus stops, you know, there'd be nothing going on at the park and ride. So everything else would just be grinding into the ground. And actually the BSIP money was, you know, gained on the basis that we would use it to try and grow the network post-COVID. And so that's why we've got an agreed policy on how much we subsidise it by. And you know, at no point did we get anything back that said, well, actually, if we do this, it'll cover the costs to an acceptable level. And just on the Lord Mayoralty, the idea that you can get elected on the 2nd of May and then suddenly reintroduce a bus service clearly shows a lack of understanding on both mayoral candidates' part of how the mayor, you're right, yeah. There's a lack of understanding on as to how contracting for bus services work, which is probably why some mayoral candidates who understand that are quiet on the issue.
Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's important to remember in this discussion that the decisions that have been made affect services all over the city, as well as this one, which has obviously received a considerable amount of airtime. So I'm wondering if you're able to give any examples of key feedback or possible tweaks to the decisions that have been made in response to the consultation for any of the other services that haven't yet been discussed tonight. And the reason I ask, if I may, is because, you know, there's a bus that runs through Holgate Ward, the number 16. That's had some adjustments made to it. They are negative adjustments. But as councillors, we're having to say to those residents, this is happening all over because of the situation that you've outlined. And I just think it's important that that citywide perspective is kept. Otherwise, you'll have everyone saying, this is outrageous because it affects them, when this is a citywide decision and there's only so much money to go around, and it's absolutely rubbish. And I think none of us should have gone into this or come out of it thinking that we're all going to get better buses, or, you know, it's about trying to cut the cloth accordingly. So it'd just be helpful to understand a bit more about that.
Okay, so the key thing that we did following the information that we got back from the consultants who are called Momentum, actually, but no relation. They was to look at what they were proposing to us and say, well, hang on a minute, how do we keep as much coverage across the city as we possibly can? So there's, you know, there are things that people need from a bus service in order to use it and to keep on using it. And one is that it goes to where they are. So we needed to tweak things to make sure that we had enough money to keep the network across the city as much as we can. And the other one was reliability, so that it turns up when you expect it to turn up. And so that's what a lot of those tweaks are about. It's about making sure that we spread. So some services have been merged. So in South Bank, for example, there used to be 2 buses serving it. Now there's 1. And the reason for that is that rather than lose a service altogether, you merge the 2. So you've still got that part of the city being covered. Moving services from 50 minutes to an hour is a similar kind of tweak to make sure that you've got it. You've still got some sort of bus service running there, because and my real worry with the areas that we have talked about already is that once you stop providing a bus somewhere, people get out of the habit. So keep making sure that you've got at least a minimum service there, and better in some areas, because what will drive increased patronage on the buses is freeing up the roads for the buses, and that's what we've had very strong feedback so far from the local transport survey, is that people do want to use the bus more, but to do that we need to clear the roads for them, so that they can run reliably and on time, and there's more of them and patronage starts to increase, so we get into that benign circle. As the more people use them, then the more the bigger and better the service can become. This is from us coming into office. What I asked officers to do is draw a baseline that we can stabilise the network, that we can build on, and that's what this is. So it's about making sure that we cover as much of the city as possible, and that we've got a reliable service.
We've got 2 minutes left. I'll ask a quick question, then Councillor Rose, and then we'll move on. Couple of quick questions from me in terms of the network review report, the momentum report that was published with the post-consultation recommendations. Was any consideration given to publishing that as a background paper with the consultation when it was launched in December? So that's the first question. Second question, without going into details of commercial and confidence conversation with other operators, was there any active attempt to look at, taking Codmanthorpe as an example, look at other operators that may be operating in that area, to look at what elements of a route they might be interested in taking on? But appreciate you might be limited in what you can say.
I think I'll leave it to the officers for the second part of your question, but the first part of your question, I think there's always a level of how much information that you put out there, in terms of the consultations that you're doing. I don't think there would have been any harm actually in publishing it earlier on. It wasn't sort of withheld on purpose, but because I guess there's a lot of technical detail in there that can, I don't know, muddy the waters or something, I suppose. But
thank you.
I think just to echo that, I think the consultation needs to be based on firm proposals, otherwise it just becomes non-engaging. So I think to have some firm proposals. So just to be absolutely crystal clear about the decisions that were made, they are to put in place a series of short-term contract extensions without any changes in the main through to 2nd of June. And that is to allow us to do a long-term rebasing, as Councillor Kilbane had mentioned, so we can procure all the contracts at one go, so that we understand what our total cost is, rather than doing one at a time and getting out of sync. So that was the decision. There are absolutely, and we have ongoing discussions with bus operators, and some of those short-term contract extensions will need to go out to other bus operators, because some of the existing bus operators have said, and we said it at the executive, no amount of money might continue to do that.
Okay. A quick question from Councillor Rose.
Yeah, it's a very specific question, which is, it sounds like there's a bit of narrative comms messaging around the fact that actually the decision here was continue and spend more and find extra money in the budget for it or not. And I just wanted to get your take on whether you felt that the consultation did adequately explain the situation, and whether you think that if there was more information around it being, we would have to cut something else to find this extra money or this, you might have had different consultation response, or if you think it would have been identical in that situation.
I think one of the weaknesses that I'll put my hand up to totally in the consultation is that we weren't clear enough that this is against the background of really increased costs in the industry. So actually the money that we've got is not going to go as far as we thought it would, because of the increased costs that means that bus services are more expensive to run. So therefore you've got to try and make your money. And I think we've been clear about that. So you know, it's not so much about cuts as about increased costs, meaning that we can't subsidise all that we'd want to subsidise.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our Q&A sessions. Thank you, officers. Thank you, Councillor Kilbane. So if I can ask the lead call-in member, please, to return to the table. Welcome back, Councillor Pearson. You will have up to 5 minutes to make any final comments you wish to make in response to what we've been discussing.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everybody this evening for sitting through and talking about buses, one of my favourite topics. So that is my favourite. So yes, just to answer a couple of points that Councillor Kilbane mentioned there on BSIP funding, I get what you mean about spending on bus shelters and departure boards and stuff like that. Personally, I'd rather spend the money on bus services, because without the bus, I'm not going anywhere. I can have a fantastic bus shelter, I can have a fantastic departure board. That's personally how I would spend the money. And in terms of freeing up the roads, my counter argument there would be, you're not going to free up the roads if you slash services. So in terms of summing up, on elections, of course, we will, we've politicised this. There is absolutely a game-changing election in York and North Yorkshire, and I'm not ashamed of us using that. 2 candidates have promised to reverse and better fund these services if elected. That's just a fact. This, however, was not a political call-in, certainly not from my perspective. It's absolutely about securing the best outcome for my residents, particularly my own residents in Haxby and Wigginton. But as Councillor Taylor pointed out earlier, it is a city-wide issue. None of us want to see a worsenment in local bus services. And as I have pointed out, this decision was not necessary. This saving was not needed right now. To suggest that this was about stabling the bus network is somewhat disingenuous. The subsidy is viable this year, and so we should have waited to get our ducks in order. It's a nationwide problem, and the idea that this is about stabilising something, particularly in York, is disingenuous. Councillor Kilbane may protest the opposite, but the fact is the Bus Forum and the Civic Trust, both non-political organisations, both agreed that the consultation was rushed and less than ideal. Consultation responses indicated the decision will increase transport deprivation. On the issue of subsidy, what has been completely omitted is this idea of cross-subsidisation, which was, in a privatised bus network, it's a bit difficult to explain, but the subsidy applied to some of the bus services, such as the number 13, cross-subsidised services elsewhere, and that's the bit that is missing. And it's disingenuous, therefore, to say that it's only £450 for however many passengers. It's actually serving a much greater number of people. But in summary, this is about the decision that was made and why it wasn't made well enough and needs to be referred back. The decision went against policy, it went against the council plan, it went against section 4.1 of the local transport strategy, it went against our commitments to reduce car use and increase bus use. It didn't consider the alternatives very well, it did not consider the views of the public, and they were clearly not considered. And there were 5 matters that were not considered, which were of material, specific or general importance, which was the loss of the dial and ride, the government's long-term vision, which is due very soon, the lack of information on objectives and impacts, the EPF not consulted, and the lack of information on subsidies. And that really concludes my issue. In summary, please refer this back to executive and let's have another bite of this cherry, because quite frankly, it's too important for residents to lose these services.
Thank you. Councillor Kilbane, would you like to return to the table? So you two have up to 5 minutes to make any closing remarks.
Thanks, Chair. And if you can give me a 1-minute warning, because I do go on and I lose myself, so that would be that would be great. Just in terms of the actual reasons for the calling, We've got to separate out the draft local transport strategy, which is, near its end, and what this bus service review was about. And the two things have been conflated in the calling. And what this was about, it wasn't about increasing bus patronage. This was, how do we stabilise the network? How do we keep the network as wide and as broad as we possibly can in the face of rising costs, dramatically rising costs? And how do we do that in a timely way, so that we can reprocure, we can extend contracts from April and look to build on that. So I think to say that it conflicts with the draft local transport strategy, well, the draft local transport strategy is the thing that will free up the roads so that the buses can be more of a desirable option. If that's what comes out through the process. So you can't really conflate the two things. As I've explained to you how we did get the consultation out before Christmas, and that was quite a push for the officer to do it. I mean, it was rushed in the sense that the officer was rushing. I think she went above and beyond, actually, the hours that she worked to get it out there. It certainly wasn't rushed through with any ill intent over the Christmas period, and then it was extended, and as you've heard, it's got a very good response. So the results of the consultation undermine the point that's being made in the calling, and again, there's a reference to reduction in patronage. Well, that's not what the bus service network review was about. So there's in all reports and in all information in all detail, you're going to get some things that are not right. That's partly what the consultation's about, is people telling you that, so that you can so that you can put them right. So on those issues, given, I think that the members who've made the call in have misinterpreted what the bus service network review was actually about, and the aims and objectives of that. And as I say, I think, especially given the representations that have been made here tonight, that this is actually about political fodder for leaflets, which is a shame, because it just takes up quite a lot of resource. But I think that's largely what this call in tonight's been about, because the points are made have totally misunderstood how bus services are procured and what the network review was about.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kilbane. So there's now an opportunity for members to make any comments that they wish to make. Each member has up to 5 minutes. Please do not feel compelled to use that allocation of time. So could I see any indications, please? Seeing Councillor Rose. Councillor Rose, I saw you first.
There was one point of clarity I wanted to raise around the consultation numbers. I think it's a moot point anyway, because the consultation you get is what you have to consider. But the last comparable consultation I can find was October 2022 around buses. There were 543 responses for that one. The consultation was statutory. It started on the 11th of August, not the ideal time. It ended 8th of September. So none of the students were in York the entire time. So I'm not saying this is ideal. I'm just saying that it's not unprecedented. The public participation said there have been a decline in bus service routes recently, called them less predictable, less useful than they used to be, said there was a vicious cycle of decline and we simply can't just wait and hope. And I fully agree with that. And I disagree that this is cynical electioneering. But what I wrote in my notes early on was it's worth noting that it's been called in by councillors who represent wards impacted by the changes and who don't like the changes and who want to be seen opposing the changes. And a quote at the end from the lead call-in councillor said, "It's about securing the best outcome for my residents." And for me, that's what we're looking at here is, it is not the ideal outcome. This isn't the best decision we would like to make. We'd like to have more money and invest in our bus service and make things better. Ideally, we would have publicly owned buses and we'd have a better network. And if we have a new mayor and they're able to look at the whole network and improve it, that's better than just keeping these services going. But when we're looking at rush through, I don't think it was rushed through. I think we have plenty of time, even allowing for Christmas, and the number of responses and the older demographic shows that we, even without lots of paper copies going through every door in York, we actually had decent numbers. I don't think it's any more opposite to the council plan than any of the other cuts we have to make that we don't like, that don't benefit people with equality issues. Every cut will disproportionately impact the people we don't want them to impact. And I think it's clear that there has been listening to the consultation throughout it. So I guess just challenging the point around that set of numbers being a bad number, I think it is evidentially a decent response for this kind of consultation. And on the other points that have been raised here, I think in terms of the way the decision's been made, it all feels right to me in terms of the decision being ideal. It very much in echoing what public participation said and councils have said, it totally isn't where we should be as a city or what we want to be seeing going forward. So that's where my head's at with things.
Thank you, Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I think when we're looking at consultation numbers of responses, it's interesting to compare to the number of people who responded to the should we have a combined authority, York and North Yorkshire Mayor, the thing that put that person, whoever that will be, in place. It's a comparable number of people, and yet that's an absolutely seismic change to the city. So actually, in that context, 1100 is pretty good. But I think we also need to be really clear about what consultation is there for, because consultation is not necessarily there as a ballot. It's not there as a do you want to do this or not? It's about saying these are the things that are going to potentially happen. What are your thoughts on it, and how can we take those into account? And I think what Councillor Kilbane has explained in quite considerable detail and with quite a lot of openness and frankness is the constraints that he had, the way in which he listened to those responses that he received. Nobody is pretending that this is wonderful. Nobody is. But it's about saying, this is where we are. This is trying to get the best out of the situation that we can. And those mayoral candidates who are saying whatever they want to be saying about funding, I'd be far more interested to be hearing what they have to say about municipally owned buses, because actually that's the only way out of this mess. Because all of this stems back to the deregulation of buses in the 1980s and trying to operate everything on a commercial basis when it's supposed to be a service. And I know Councillor Pearson likes to talk about the railways, and I've got a bit of history with the railways. And here on the East Coast Main Line, the whole of the North East Railway used to be subsidised by the profits that were made from the East Coast Main Line. All those little branch lines, all the routes between Scarborough and Whitby, or whatever, all the things that have been lost. It was about taking the profit out of the profitable parts of the network and using that to cross-subsidise the least profitable parts of the network. And actually, that's what we've lost in the way that the buses operate in the city and in the country. So anything that we can do as a city to try to get those commercial operators to operate on a more equitable basis has to be a good thing. And again, I have every confidence in Councillor Kilbane that he will be absolutely driving as hard a bargain as he possibly can be with the different operators, because that's, again, the only way that we come out of this. But in terms of the actual call-in, we're being asked to look at, has the decision been made in line with the policy framework? Well, we've had it explained to us that the policy framework told Councillor Kilbane that he had to make a cut that he essentially didn't want to see happen, but there was no way to look at the policy framework and continue to operate that part of the service around Cottonthorpe, but has recognised that this is impacting across the city. So I don't see at all how we've missed the first one. In terms of meaningfully considering all alternatives and taking into account the views of the public, again, quite demonstrably, we've heard at some length the consideration that's been given, and likewise taking into account all relevant matters in general specific and ignoring irrelevant matters. This is about trying to get something in place for April and then on towards June. The fact that somebody who may or may not get elected in somewhere else that isn't directly related to the city and may or may not be able to deliver some funding in some amount of time that may or may not be within a procurement window is not really relevant to this part of the process. The process here is we've got a pot of money, we've got a set of services we need to try our best to deliver. How do we best use that money? And I think on that basis, the call-in has no legs whatsoever. And in fact, we've been here for an hour and a half so far, and I dread to think what that's cost in terms of council officer time, let alone our own personal time. And if we're really worried about the way in which we're using money and how the council is operating, I do think we need to be thinking a bit more carefully about the number of call-ins that we're receiving, because actually it seems to be 1 or 2 a month at the moment, which not sure how constructive that is or isn't.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. I'm surprised to hear Councillor Crawshaw complaining about call-ins when he was the person saying all the way through the last session of council that Scrutiny should have more teeth. I find that strange, but I don't think two wrongs make a right, Councillor Rose. That consultation that was done over summer 2022 was clearly wrong. It's the wrong time to do it if people are away on holiday. It's also completely wrong to do a public consultation over the Christmas period when people are not thinking in any way about bus services. They're thinking about going out, having a good time, what they're going to get the kids. I asked people in Strensall, how many of you knew about bus consultation? Couldn't find a single person who knew. Now, it didn't matter quite so much for Strensall because people in Strensall, the number 5 bus, thankfully, is not affected at present. You say that the morality doesn't affect this area. It fundamentally affects it. It's a game changer in terms of what it can do. It could allow councils to take over bus services. And personally, I think that would be a great thing. I've always believed that deregulation of buses was a bad thing for providing services. It's a service and it needs to be funded properly, and it should be funded from grants from central government to enable us to have proper buses, because we will never get people out of their cars and out of their cars, which is the key thing that clogs up the city centre, if we don't provide a bus service that's viable. Now, you can say, yes, this is a very small cut in bus services, here and there, but that's a loss of income to the council, to the bus companies. And if they lose income, then will they need more subsidies in the future because they're losing income on other routes? It's the start of a slippery slide. But my fundamental problem with this is the timing of that consultation, which I think was ghastly. I appreciate what Councillor Coburn is saying. It needs to be done quickly, but surely it could have been delayed till the sort of second week in January, and people have got back from the new year, the back at work. The other thing about it, it also cuts out almost the entire student population, because most of that student population would not be returning until probably the second week in January to resume the studies. So we've got possibly 20,000 students across the city who simply didn't get part to have their say.
Thank you, Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. I don't agree with some of the comments about wasting time with call-ins. I think there's a process there which actually is really valuable. As elected members, we need to be accountable, and we need to be able to explain to our electors why we do what we do and why decisions are made. So for me, having a call-in actually enables those decision makers to explain and justify the decisions, and those call-in members, it gives them an opportunity to explain the reasons why they believe these decisions were taken rashly or not in line with policy. And so for me, having the opportunity to spend an hour and a half discussing this, actually, I think has been really beneficial. And I would not in any way want to discourage any member from calling in any decision if they felt it was the right thing to do. I kind of find myself slightly conflicted in that, if I'm asked the question, do I believe that there's been a breach, and do I believe this decision was made irrationally or not in line with kind of policy, I have not been convinced this evening that that is the case. So at the moment, I'm kind of slightly conflicted. I genuinely, I have tried in all the time I've been an elected member to try and be as balanced as I can in terms of the decisions I made and not have them politically biased. It would be easy for me as a politician of an affected ward to say, I've stood up for you, and I think, we need to be far more pragmatic. And so for me, in terms of the call, I think it's been really useful. It's been really useful for me to understand the process of the decision and why the decisions have been made. I am slightly I'm slightly confused as to why we have a consultation if there's been no specific changes or no specific influence on the ultimate decision. And the executive member quite rightly said that it's not right that residents have to have a further length to walk to get a bus, and all the emotive reasons both for and against have been played out this evening around the table. But I guess for me, if I have to be true and honest as to why I'm sat around this table, if I'm asked the question directly, do I think it's a breach, and do I think that the decision has been made irrationally or not in line with policy, then I have not been convinced of that as it stands.
Okay. we'll come to the voting bit in a minute, so hold your horses. Councillor Steele's Walshaw.
Yeah, I want to discuss again on the consultation and it being rushed through. I did want to make a point that a large amount of people who work in this city work in hospitality, and they definitely aren't often doing nothing over the Christmas period. But also on the flip side of this, I also was thinking about people who are off over the Christmas period. That's kind of time when people aren't so rushed and are able to do these sorts of things and fill in things like consultations. Also to say that students and people who weren't in the city were excluded, if they were still following social media channels, they'd very much have seen that advertised and being able to respond. And I think it did go out in enough time for as many people as possible to be consulted.
Thank you very much. A few comments from me. I think I don't think anybody is in any doubt, and it's certainly been the case for a number of years, about difficult decisions that have had to have been made in order to protect the coverage of York's bus services, and in some cases that has led to a reduction in frequency. I think where there's a proposal that leads to a withdrawal of part of a route, I think that almost needs a different kind of consideration and consultation. And I've no doubt how hard the office worked on this consultation, because I was in correspondence with them after it was published to make sure I understood what the proposals were, and so I could communicate them. But I think in looking at the equalities impact assessment, there are a number of statements contained within that in terms of, well, you know, there's the York Wheels volunteer car service, which there is, and that offers a fantastic service. But I didn't get the sense as whether there'd been any assessment of whether that, to what extent that had capacity in terms of availability of volunteer drivers for the most part, to pick up some of the inevitable increase in demand that may arise. So the impression I got from the EIA that it had sensible things in it, but I wasn't sure to what extent the robustness of those had been tested. I think it would have been helpful for the network review report to have been published alongside the consultation. Reading it afterwards with the recommendations, the whole thing made more sense to me, because I understood where this consultation fitted in terms of the sort of the broader plan that was set out in that consultant report. So I personally think that would have, you know, and it has been mentioned, I did spend over Christmas reading things I would otherwise not have had time to read. So yeah, it's 6.5 dozen, but I certainly think it would have helped me, and potentially would have helped others as well, who are, you know, perhaps looking at it from a more strategic perspective. I think it would have been helpful for Scrutiny being asked to have a look at this at some point in the run-up to the proposals being published. I appreciate Scrutiny has a very packed agenda, and I appreciate that timescales don't always lend themselves to accommodating items when they need to be considered. So yes, it was difficult. Was there more that could have been done? I think there was, but I know for a fact that officers worked as diligently, as hard as they could, to make sure there was a consultation, and it was important people had the opportunity to have their say. I know I and other colleagues did spend a lot of time letting people know it was happening, and I was pleased to see that a sufficient number of people did, or, you know, more people than I perhaps would have expected did take part. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to comment a bit more on the consultation, if I may. I'd still maintain that it wasn't ideally timed, but I think there's some admittance of that from the executive and his exec member, and he's highlighted the difficulty in the run-up to that Christmas period and how the officer pushed themselves to get it out before Christmas. And even though it's not ideal, I would say that it's performed better than I would have expected. I'm actually say actually like it's a surprise. I'm very cynical about how well the council gets word out about these things, and that number is actually a lot better than I thought they'd get. Representation of older respondents, I think, is strong. One thing I would say is that I think being listened to and having a say doesn't always mean it's not the same thing as getting what you want. And councillors across the board have got to be better at communicating that to residents. Otherwise we get nowhere. You know, consultations aren't ballots, as has already been raised. That being said, and I tried to sort of get this out the exec member, but there are examples of responses to the consultation on final decisions. So that number 16 in Holgate, the consultant recommended cutting out the loop around Holly Bank. That isn't happening now. Thank God it's not happening, because that would really make life difficult for people around there. It was going to just go at Hamilton Drive. And there were some respondents that addressed that, and it looks like the decision has factored that in and not cut out the Holly Bank loop. So the consultation has had some impact on some parts of the decision. Granted, not what people all over the city would like, but that's the nature of the game when it comes to less money to play with, sadly, and that's not a position I would ever want us to be in, and what most politicians wouldn't want to end up being in. And the last thing I'd say is, on the timing of the consultation, if it was to be favourably timed to accommodate the student population, and I'm taking a big gamble here in saying this, but I think those sort of touching on this need to be careful what they wish for, because if this consultation was full or more populated by responses from the student body, I suspect its findings would be even more anchored away from the particular problem route that's been flagged up in this decision, unless Cotman Thorpe is housing thousands of students that we're not aware of. So there is no perfect consultation. There are examples of the consultation impacting on some of the decisions. And it's just grim all round, really. But I think the representations that have been made by the executive member communicate best endeavours and communicate trying to stabilise bus services for the time being, which is more valuable than giving everyone or more people more of what they want and taking a gamble with those services further down the line. That's where I'm at on the consultation point. Thanks.
Thank you. Conscious of time, and you've already spoken, Councillor Fisher, and clarification. Yeah.
Could I just clarify that in no way will my comments should be interpreted as a criticism of the officer concerned, who obviously did an incredibly good job in getting the consultation out. That was not a criticism of the officer. I want to make absolutely 100% clear.
Thank you very much. Okay, members, we will now move to the vote. Before I do,
each one, whether they declare for each one or for each.
yes, I'm going to do.
Oh, I know, but then the single vote comes after that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yes, okay. So I shall ask each of you in turn whether you consider there has been a breach or no breach in terms of whether the decision followed the principles of good decision making with reference to the call-in request. So am I reading them out or are you reading the names out?
I'm happy to read out.
You read the names out. So it's breach or no breach?
Right. We were going to do this alphabetically. However, we've had late substitutes, etc., etc. So bear with me. So Councillor Baxter, I'll try and do it alphabetically.
No breach.
Councillor Burton.
No.
Councillor Clark.
No breach.
Councillor Crawshaw.
No breach.
Councillor Fenton.
Breach.
Sure. Councillor Fisher.
Breach.
Councillor Healy.
Breach.
Councillor Knight.
Breach.
Councillor Rowley.
No breach.
Councillor Rose, thank you. Yep.
No breach.
Councillor Steelswalshaw.
No breach.
Councillor Taylor.
No breach.
Councillor One.
Breach.
So. As expected. 7 no breach and 6 breach. I can't be right.
No,
What have I
the wrong
got?
column.
Oh, was it? It's in the wrong column, right. Yes, no, that's really though. What have you got? I've done that. Oh, right. That's really right, okay. So 8-5 then, yep.
Okay, so
eight
that's
for no breach.
8 voting for no breach, 5 for breach. Do we have to do a show of hands now
You
as well?
do, yes, you do.
Okay, so as you were, hands up for no breach. Don't ask me.
I'll say it again, otherwise. Yes, 8.
And hands up for breach.
Oh,
And the numbers is,
and the numbers.
no, it's as per
No.
the constitution.
Bad breach.
Yeah. Okay, so so there is result, there is no breach. The final question to ask is there any issues arising that members would wish to be picked up by scrutiny, for example? I'll probably leave that thought with Councillor Taylor in terms of future scrutiny agenda items in relation to sort of key decision points coming up in relation to bus services. We heard from the executive member about a sort of a new, more wide-ranging round of contracts, renewals or lettings. So that's maybe something that when you talk about work plan, that's something that maybe can be on the list.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely take that on board, but with the obvious caveat that that will mean making room for it at the expense of other items that councillors across the board say are also really, really important. You know, if I could, I'd have many more meetings of that scrutiny committee, but we only have certain amount of time to play with. But yeah, I take your point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Burton.
I think maybe we could consider looking at funding some replacement to park and ride and asking if that's looked at as well.
Dial and ride.
Dynamite. Sorry. No, not park and ride, dial and ride.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's noted. Okay, it's 8 minutes to 7, so if we can adjourn for a break, and if we aim to start just before 7, so if we have a 5-minute break and then be ready to start at 7 on the dot. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, members, to the second part of this evening's meeting. So the second call-in we will be considering relates to the decision around civic protocols. Before we start, I've been advised to advise members in relation to a written statement that was circulated by one of the call-in members. I've been advised to advise you to disregard that written statement. Okay, so we will begin as we did with the last call-in with some public speakers. We have two public speakers who are with us in person and one who's joining us remotely. So we'll take our remote public speaker first, and that is Barbara Boyce. Can you hear us, Barbara?
I can, yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, yes. Yes, so you'll have, you know the score, you'll have 3 minutes, so please do start in your own time.
Thank you, and thank you, members, and I hope I can be of some help to you. I think everybody's well aware of the budgetary restrictions that all local authorities are having to deal with at the moment. So it is inevitable that the Civic Office and the Lord Mayor will have to bear some of those cuts. I hope it can be done sympathetically to the historic role of the Lord Mayor, whilst bringing the traditions into the 21st century. I was the Lord Mayor in 2017-18, and I do recall there were times when I questioned the necessity and importance to the community of some of the things that were being funded by the Civic Office. One suggestion, I think, could be reducing the role of the Sheriff to occasional support or standing in for the Lord Mayor. If the Sheriff and consort were not at most events, it would remove the need for a very expensive limousine with extra seats. A smaller and more economical vehicle could be used, which could have other uses when not being used by the Lord Mayor. Most cities don't have 4 in their civic parties, and it does seem a little bit excessive at times. Also, consider whether the supported events are all vital. There are organisations in the city who consider themselves entitled to civic visits, who are not as traditional and as historic as they would have people believe. For instance, the very many guild services, parades and dinners that are all full of so-called dignitaries and are not of a lot of relevance to the majority of citizens. Community organisations, charities and small businesses are probably far more important to the city, and support for them by the Civic Party wouldn't be affected by these proposals. The role of Lord Mayor should also, I think, be more secular. The expectation is that you attend large numbers of Church of England services and have a spiritual advisor. I made a special effort to attend Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, other faiths events, but it wasn't sort of expected. And it does make the Lord Mayor less relevant to those of other or no religions. Please also try not to be too prescriptive about the Lord Mayor's charities. These are a personal choice, but there is a need for charities who have the capacity to do a lot of the fundraising and running events themselves. It's especially the case since the civic support for the fundraising was removed some years ago. I had a selection procedure for charities, and the willingness to cooperate was vital. It does mean smaller charities can get a chance to be involved. I had a small refugee charity as one of mine, and it did create some grumbles, but their contribution was far greater than their size. Perhaps also you could consider having the Mansion House managed externally and expected to pay for itself. Up to 2018, a lot of money was spent refurbishing the Mansion House, and there was such a controversy that York made a rare appearance in privatised Rotten Boroughs Awards. Now it appears
draw
that the
your
renovations...
remarks to a close, please, Barbara.
Yeah. It appears that the renovations don't meet current standards, and the debate about the Mansion House opens up again. I hope you consider this helpful. I know it's difficult, and there's people who make a lot of noise and want nothing to change, but the civic role has needed reviewing for a long time, even if not forced by the current situation. Thank you, everybody, and good luck.
Thank you for your time, Barbara. Okay, so if I now call David Carr, if you would like to join us at the table, please, David. Again, you'll be familiar with the process here. You'll have three minutes in your own time, David.
Thank you, Chair.
You might, please.
Members.
You might, please.
You might. Sorry.
We easily forget, don't we? Thank you, Chair. Yes, I am David Carr. I'm addressing you this evening on the Civic Review as a very recent Lord Mayor of York. It was my privilege to hold that ancient and prestigious office during the last civic year, 2022 to 23, one of the most auspicious civic years of recent times, including as it did the death of Queen Elizabeth and the 2 visits to York by the King. I wish to make it clear that I speak tonight not in any political or partisan capacity. I do believe it is incumbent on the office of Lord Mayor, as the first citizen of York, to lead by example in showing cost restraint when many of York's citizens are suffering from financial hardship, declining living standards, and service cuts. And therefore, in general, given the pressure on the council's resources, I recognise the need to review the scope of activities and cost of the civic roles, and to ensure there is a strong and more codified, clear and collegiate basis on which to secure the activities and role of the mayoralty going forward. I do, however, have 1 or 2 reservations. I would hope that further budget savings yet to be identified might enable some restoration of the reduced allowances payable to the Lord Mayor and to the Sheriff. We must not let those roles become the preserve only of wealthier members. With regard to the car, whilst I accept there is scope to reduce its use and the attendant security provision, I would hope that its total abolition is not being mooted. I believe a mayoral car is required on specific occasions for security and privacy, and to provide that element of civic projection or grandeur, which is a necessary part of the civic role. Perhaps there is scope for some discreet and tasteful commercial sponsorship in providing the mayoral car. Section 18 of the report talks about the economic and tourism role of the Lord Mayor being taken over by the elected York and North Yorkshire Mayor. To my mind, members, this represents the biggest potential threat to the future of the Lord Mayor of York. The elected Mayor's office will be well-funded and high-profile. It will capture press attention when the Lord Mayor doesn't seem to these days, and there is confusion in the minds of the public between the elected Mayor and the Lord Mayor. It would be a considerable backward step if the elected Mayor were allowed to overshadow, if not usurp, the status, visibility, and prominence of the Lord Mayor of York. I therefore believe the ongoing protocol review needs to firmly establish strict and binding terms of engagement with the elected Mayor to set clear boundaries between the relative roles of the elected Mayor and the Lord Mayor in the life of this city.
If you could bring your remarks to a close.
And finally, I'll end on a rather radical note. Does the Civic Party have to comprise 4 people? There could be substantial cost savings from reducing the Civic Party to 2 people, the Lord Mayor and the Sheriff. And the Sheriff may or may not be the Lord Mayor's partner. That suggestion might be a step too far for many, but I will leave it to others to decide whether it's a basis for further consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you. I'll turn this off now.
Thank you. And our final speaker this evening is Honorary Alderman Brian Watson. Would you like to join us at the table, Brian? So it's the mic button in the middle. It'll pop up green when you're on. Okay, so you've got 3 minutes, Brian, and you're on time.
Thank you, Chair. I sit here tonight as an how shall I put it now, father of the council, an ex-Lord Mayor, an ex-sheriff, and 3 posts which I have held with great respect, and I'm very honoured to achieve them. And I cannot understand why ex-Lord Mayors, ex-sheriffs, councillors, etc., for that matter, fail to understand to any degree. They've held that honour, and yet now they want to rub it out. Some, even more than once, they have had the honour, but they just don't wish to carry the traditions forward, or its traditional home. But let's look at some of the points raised that have question marks against them. First of all, we are told that the Mansion House flat cannot be used for safety reasons in case of fire and an unsafe lift. Well, when it was built to replace the old fire escape, it was fireproof. So why the change? A slight hint that the rules were changed after the Grenfell fire. So how much has changed and what would the cost of that be? Secondly, another statement has been made regarding the heritage grant, stating that under this, the house must be open to the public 5 days a week. So it would not be appropriate for the Civic Party to use it as a home. Now, which is it, the former or that? It seems to me that someone should reveal what consultation there was with and with from whom? From the council officers and councillors with English heritage, when for the grant agreement. There is another statement that the fire escape onto the roof from the flat is no longer appropriate. Why? Surely if there's a fire raging up the stairs, the Civic Party, caretaker, or any member of staff or public is not going to stand there and say, we can't get out that way, it's inappropriate. Let's sit down and fry. Can you imagine the outrage if anyone dies? Get it made safe to use in emergency at least. A reference is also made to risk assessments being made at functions and appointments for the Civic Party. Does this include the stretch as far as assessing the danger of bus queues along the route when they are travelling by the bus? Just where does this start and end? Lastly, the monitoring officer saying it does not qualify to be called in because it does not affect more than 2 wards. The Lord Mayor is Lord Mayor over all the wards in the city and would not raise a significant amount of public interest, he said. Of course it does. Everywhere you go, somebody's talking about this.
If you could draw your remarks to a close, please, Brian.
Thank you. But you know, that's no excuse for all this attitude that comes from officers and people. It only goes to show, by his antics, that not only an executive member who admits to having experienced an inexperienced opinion, it's some of the officers as well who are writing the rules.
I'll have to cut you off there, Brian. I'm afraid you're well over 3.5 minutes.
But can I just stress that, you know, this is a scrutiny committee, so as the saying goes, please do what it says on the tin and scrutinise.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Okay, thank you to all of our public speakers. So we now move into the next phase, which is to hear from the call-in members. So if I can invite councillors Mason, Stewart and Orrell to join us at the table, please. As I did at the beginning of the last session, I'll remind members of the committee and call-in members, we're not here to have a debate about whether you agree with the decision or not. We're here to discuss the basis on which the decision was called in and refer you to the call-in request form where it indicates the areas in which it is felt by the call-in members that the decision was deficient. So if we can bear that in mind as we embark on the next phase of this meeting, that will be appreciated. So, calling members, you have collectively up to 10 minutes to tell us a bit about why you've called this decision in.
Thank you. And actually, maybe a minute or so warning towards the end of our 10 minutes might be useful. Councillor Fenson's right there. We're not here. You've heard the public speakers there that are focused on the actual decision, but clearly we're here to talk about that decision-making process, and that's where all our comments will focus. I suppose the starting point is for us that we feel this should be a key decision. Clearly goes further than budget, looks at process, looks at roles, responsibilities, how the Civic Party will function, and particularly in that light of that elected mayor. York is very key in that civic status, and we think that is a role that's important in terms of being important to the whole city, and definitely one we feel should have made the cut in terms of being classed as a key decision. Obviously, we think there's equalities implications and obviously constitutional impacts in terms of some of the roles that are defined in the Constitution for the Lord Mayor and Sheriff and how this paper changes those. And obviously, we've outlined Article 7, 3.2, which goes on giving advice about what could be a key decision and when people should think it is an act, I suppose, with some more thought about how that might be seen politically. In terms of the consultation, clearly none. The incoming Lord Mayor was consulted. I think it's fair to say once the Civic Protocols review paper was put on the forward plan, there was interest. On the 6th of November, I'd emailed the Assistant Director and got a reply saying, once we have something to consult on, we'll let you know. On the 7th of November, two ex-civics, two ex-sheriffs that were sheriffs to Labour Lord Mayors met with the leader and the Chief Operating Officer and clearly highlighted to them that there was interest in what was going on and that it was of importance that people wanted to feel they had their chance to contribute and be included in that. And obviously since that decision, we've had the Business Improvement Director, Hospitality Association, Chamber, and obviously latterly the Civic Trust saying that, that engagement, that consultation is important to them. We don't understand why no former civics were involved. There's only 3 of us on the council that have ever held a civic office out of the 47. Obviously the Deputy Lord Mayor, current Lord Mayor weren't consulted. We can see why it's important that the current or the incoming Lord Mayor would be consulted. Clearly there's a plan of how you might operate going forward, and it's key for them to be involved in that, but part of the wider consultation, we think. In terms of equalities impact, again, it's fine making a statement saying, well, when it comes up, we'll deal with it. But I think there's some overarching broad implications of these decisions. David Carr touched on there the financial ones in terms of who can obtain the office. We know about things like mobility, transport, being able to function, but there's some really broad ones where we think there could have been some work done to highlight what those impacts might have been on people. Touching on finance, I think we would have wanted to see some financial information. Obviously, there was very sparse financial detail, to be fair. Breakdowns, costs. There is two budgets that have clearly been published now, but there's no reason they couldn't have been part of that bigger decision-making process. Obviously, the paper commits to expenditure. There's no quotes. There's no estimates of what that expenditure is going to cost. And obviously, no analysis, no comparison. What does a good civic funding look like? What's bad? Are we spending 10 times more than we should? Not enough. A bit of Googling. Newark Town Council spends 55k. Farley's mayor gets a 2k allowance. Those type of things that would help kind of benchmark and make a good decision. And clearly during the whole process in the media debates, there was different figures banded, 26k, 53k, came to the meeting and it was 130k. Where was the really clear outline of where it was? And in terms of what the narrative has been around cutting hospitality and events, it would be easy to cut that type of money out of the budget. So why not articulate it very clearly? £5,000 gone for annual council. There was some really detailed stuff that could have been done in that paper to really show where the money was going to. And I suppose the concern is that if it isn't articulated, how do we know how that falls long term and what impacts that might have? And again, looking at the annex of events, which lists costs, you've got two. And again, having done the job, you know what you're looking for. And with no disrespect to officers, there's a lot of changeover in the civic office. You've got two events listed twice, but calling them different things. And one of them costs 20% more than the first one. You've got other events where there's no cost, and we know there is a cost because it's a full day event. So it's that type of stuff where if there'd been consultation, we could have provided that feedback very clearly and made it clear where that saving could have come from. I'll pass it to Councillor Oral, who will say a bit more, and then Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Over the last few weeks, I've been very surprised at how many people have come up to me and spoke to me about these proposals spontaneously without me approaching them. The reaction of everyone I've spoken to, from past civics to charities to people in general, was nobody asked me what I thought. These are some of the comments that have been made to me over the past few weeks. First, the group that for many years has raised thousands of pounds each year for Lord Mayor's charities, who told us that if there'd been a consultation, they would have reported that they would find it very difficult to motivate their volunteers for a politically designated purpose. I was told categorically, we've worked with Lord Mayors from all political parties and raised money for their charities. The charities they have chosen, not one chosen for them by a political group. Another person said to me, if I'd been consulted, I would have said how important the ceremonial impact of the Civic Party is. And a former teacher said, if I'd been consulted, I would have detailed the impact that a Civic Party has on the life of a school, with DM1, the robes and chains, and queried whether schools had been consulted, adding it wouldn't be the same without DM1 and the chains. And then another comment. If there'd been a consultation, I would have said that I feared this was the first step in abolishing the mayoralty. I did challenge the person on that. I said that I didn't think the executive member or the leader would give their names to a report which says how important the mayoralty is if they didn't believe in its future. Didn't convince that person very much. The thought that he had was that if the mayoralty was reduced and reduced, its impact on the community would be lessened until eventually its survival would be put in question. Then there was a person who was suspicious of the fact that the Civic report came out just before the budget meeting. If I'd been consulted, I would have asked, why was all the attention on the mayoralty when there were £1 million plus cuts being made to libraries, Salvation Army, Wilberforce Trust and many others? It just seems a diversionary tactic to me.
2-minute warning.
I better let you get on then, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, we'd all agree that the role of Lord Mayor is not unchangeable, and nor should it be. I remember in the 1990s when my godfather was Lord Mayor going into the Mansion House, which he was then living in with his family, and there was no one else, no other obligations. He had 2 chefs and a butler. And that clearly is not a situation we need or to go back to. There has been a change, but we have to look at the way this decision has been taken. And for me, you know, those are the reasons why this call-in matters. Two principal reasons, and I say this as someone who believes that the role of Lord Mayor is a really important office, and it's something that we should protect and we should look after. And we go to many meetings where we look at how York compares on benchmark targets against other parts of the region, Bradford or Doncaster or Sheffield. And I always say, well, York fundamentally is better than these places. And we shouldn't be afraid to say it in many ways because of our history, because of what we got. If you gave Doncaster the city walls, if you gave Bradford sort of the history we've got on things like the mayoralty, then they will be standing a lot taller. You know, we should be proud of the Lord Mayoralty. And in this decision, when we look at changes to the role, it should be a key decision. It's ludicrous to say it affects 2 wards. It affects the whole city. You know, it should have group leaders involved. It shouldn't be something that is looked at last minute. It's entirely the wrong way to go about it. These sorts of things should be cross-party, as indeed they always have been. cross-party. And the second thing I think is that the decision's finances are dubious to say the least. They make no attempt to really assess the value of the Lord Mayor. You've heard from Councillor Mason about double counting in the figures, but they still look at it as a crude series of expenditures rather than the reality about the Lord Mayor adds value, adds massive value. The role of the elected mayor we're going to see, I think, is profoundly different, but our Lord Mayor can add great value to the city, tourist-wise and everything like that. And that is not assessed. And also the more intangible value, which matters all the more, of the Lord Mayor attending events. Councillor Orwell attended at quite short notice.
Bring your remarks to a close.
Thank you, I will do. At quite short notice, a community beer festival in Rufford. The value that added just to dozens and dozens of people meeting the Lord Mayor, you can't put a price on that. That's something we should look towards enhancing.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so members, you now have up to 20 minutes to pose questions to the call-in members. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. This call-in is going to be much easier than the previous one. And I would hope that we could get out of here quite quickly. So my 3 questions are that I've picked up from what you've said is the wards in the paper. It suggests it only affects Guildhall. I would put to you and to the other members on the committee that actually affects all of the wards. So that's a fairly straightforward. Is that an error? Is that not an error? It's not something we can spend huge amounts of time.
So the question is.
So the question is, do you believe that it should affect all of the wards, not just the Guildhall?
Yes.
Making it a key decision. Good. Okay. We'll move on to the next point then.
Hang on. I'm going to give everybody a chance, so we'll come back. We'll come back to you. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It should be dead easy because fundamentally nothing's changing in the role. So the decision is a tiny decision. I totally agree that there shouldn't be 2 wards impacted because there should be 0 wards impacted in this. Nothing fundamentally is actually changing here. We're just having some limitations around some of the spend. So my question is, why is it that you think that any ward is actually fundamentally impacted by the decision that has been made here? Because I genuinely don't understand why some better governance around the way that the charity money is managed and limitations around the ways in which transport is there with protections on equalities, why that would impact any ward in the city, including Guildhall wards. So I genuinely would like to understand what your thinking is around why this is impacting any of the wards.
Who would like to have a go at that?
Shall I start? Well, I suppose the Lord Mayor of York is the Lord Mayor of York, and that is 47 councillors that can be Lord Mayor. They each represent a ward. So just as a geographical basis, you've got someone potentially from any part of the city can be Lord Mayor. I think on a wider basis, this is just the status of York. This is a big, important city in terms of civic life, civic heritage, in terms of the value it adds to the city. That any change to how that operates is important. Whether you say it's a reduction in funding, whether it's how it operates, that's important. Whether you think the idea of the decision is right or wrong is irrelevant. It still affects and it is still important. I think normally what we'd see in these type of processes is that something like this would go to group leaders before, it would be consulted, it would be sussed out to see what was controversial or not. And at that point, probably it would then move forward. But this has gone through none of those processes. So there's not even been anything to establish really how other parties view this decision. But clearly it was going to be controversial and political, and looking at the Constitution and what qualifies as a key decision, then clearly it falls into that category.
Thank you. Did you want to come in on that point, Councillor Stewart?
Yeah, because I think it's an interesting logic from Councillor Rhodes. I mean, obviously, from our point of view, it affects all wards, because such is the role of Lord Mayor, such is the impact. I think the logic that it affects 0 wards is really quite an unusual one. I think that is definitely one for the executive member to ask to your administration about why they are taking decisions at executive, that we have an executive member here tonight, we have a council leader here tonight, we have an assistant director, we have a director, we have other officers, and why on earth the executive is wasting their time taking decisions that do not impact on any wards at all seems rather curious.
Councillor Crawshaw.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just supplementary to the comments that were made about this being a controversial decision. And I totally appreciate that some of the misinformation that's been spread around the city has created a lot of controversy. But if you look at page 266 in paragraph 5, and it talks about the protocols, and in particular talks about there being informal agreements and that protocols have been open to wide interpretation, creating pressures around budget management, and that the proposal here is to add some revisions to ensure that there's clarity around decision making and level of expectation to give us tighter budget management, given the terrible financial situation that I think we all accept the council is in. I don't quite understand what's controversial about that. Could you explain how that's controversial?
Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, I think Councillor Crawshaw's misunderstood the way the call-ins work nowadays, which is call-ins are not about the way decisions are taken. They're about the process that's been gone through, not the actual decision. So in terms of tweaking things to the Lord Mayor's role, there might be nothing wrong with that. The issue is this should be a key decision, and this should be done, in our view, with cross-party support, not the Labour group deciding it and the Labour group then whipping it through full council. The Civic office should be apolitical, and it's the cross-party way decisions should be taken, not the decision themselves.
All right, thank you. Sorry, perhaps misinterpreted the way in which I'm trying to phrase the question. Councillor Mason said that because it was controversial, that in itself made it a key decision. And I'm seeking to ask how he believes that the key part of the decision, which is around making sure that everybody's clear about the ways in which the protocols are applied, in what way that would be controversial.
I think that's part of the decision, isn't it? It's not the whole decision. I think if you're just wanting to put in something that formalised what was already happening, no problem. And I think, and this is, I suppose, what's frustrating from a cross-party point of view is we know savings can be made. We know there's work to be done to make it more effective. You know, we've got this great resource that we're not making the most of. You know, there's nothing wrong with parts of that type of thing, but it's the whole decision in totality and the different styles and models of operation that it changes, and that's what makes it, we think, a key decision.
Okay. Councillor Healy, do you have your second question?
Oh, yes. So we've covered wards. I don't think there's any.
We've done wards.
Yeah, we've done wards. Good. Does it apply to all or none? Seems to be quite contentious. So the financial details, which is I've written down 4C for some reason. That's on the call-in, I think. There was very little financial details in this at all, to the point where we were subsequently issued, so it wasn't with the original decision pack and I don't think it went to executive either. I think it went to an executive member decision-making session. We were given this budget, which compares 22-23 with 23-24. If this was needed to be provided to the committee post-decision, that almost immediately invalidates the original decision, because this should have been made public at the time of the decision based upon it. So that's my second question. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. You're quite correct. We're now given financial information that the executive member presumably didn't have when she made a decision. So it's not logical that that decision should have been made without this financial information.
If I could just come in at that point, looking at the paragraph 8 on page 10, just to clarify for members what we can and cannot consider. States members need to consider any breach specifically identified in the call-in request in relation to the original report to the executive and the consequential decision made. So I understand the agenda supplement was published. I'm not quite sure why or with whose authorization, but it does jar somewhat with that section in paragraph 8. I don't know if you can clarify.
Well, Pauline may need to help me with this, but from my understanding, the monitoring officer has actually clarified that it was absolutely fine for the additional information to be circulated. I think it was information that had been mentioned or promised at the executive member decision-making session and the yeah.
Well, when you have your bit, if you can explain that. Yeah.
So because that information was asked for, it was genuinely felt that that information would be beneficial to this committee in considering the call-in request. And the monitoring officer was happy for that to be provided. So the information was provided.
Okay,
So
thank you. Did you have a third question, councillor Ely?
Well, just to clarify my original question, if this was thought it was needed to come to this committee to explain the decision, it should have been at the original executive decision-making session. So
Is that a question to the
that, no, anyway, I'll move on to that. That's the clarification, the first one. Anyway, third question, page 275, consultation. Essentially, it was only with the incoming Lord Mayor. Given everything that has been said previously, do you think that that was in any way adequate?
Thank you. I think we've demonstrated, all three of us, that the consultation was almost non-existent and therefore inadequate. It didn't meet any consultation process that the council should carry out.
Just as I'll bring councillor Rose in a minute. Councillor Mason, you mentioned an email you'd received, which alluded to a consultation. What can you explain a bit more about what exactly was?
Yeah, so just give me 2 seconds, I'll get it back up. I suppose, you know, as someone who watches the forward plan, when I saw the civic protocols was coming up, it was of interest, clearly. So I obviously emailed the officer responsible for the report, who's at assistant director level, clearly, you know, indicating I'd like to be involved in that process, what would be coming through. And the response I got was, once we have something to consult on, we can let you know. So to me, that made me think something was coming at some point, and clearly the report then got deferred, I think, for a month from when it was going to be considered. But you know, clearly there was interest in what was going on, and like I said, the meeting on the 7th, only the day after that email with the leader and the chief operating officer, you know, there was interest in what was going on, and it should have been picked up that people, you know, people wanted to contribute. You know, we all can see where the savings can be made, where things can be done better. You know, we're all passionate about this role because we think it's got a place and can be a real asset to the council if it's used properly. You know, we want to be involved, and I think there's lots of great ideas we can have, lots of things we can give insights into. I think the director of the bid put it in a great way that, you know, no councillor, no council officer can do the same role or has done the same role. It's a very unique position that you're in. And I think us being able to share that feedback is really important.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, it's kind of a slightly deeper dive into my previous question, but it's on the point of consultation more. I don't fundamentally think this decision fundamentally changed the role in any way whatsoever. I did, by the way, I was watching it live at the time online. I watched the whole thing in full. I read the same papers everybody else read, right? So this isn't just coming in and reading this input, and I have read what's been called in. The question for me is increasing governance around charity money, and we heard on the call that it hasn't really been managed properly in the past. It's kind of been left loose as to how that money ends up in the right hands. The more transparent intentional decisions around spending limitations on things like transport or similar. Again, we heard some veiled comments. I don't want to say veiled comments, but hints that maybe the way the Mansion House has been used in the past would benefit from slightly tighter governance. They're not controversial decisions. So what specific decisions, because there's a number of decisions that were made, each of those different agreed to, which specific decisions do you think were impacting wards, were significant or controversial? What bits changed? Because I totally agree with the points made that a lot of public participation comments are around losing allowance, but the special responsibility allowance isn't changing. A lot of the comments are around the role being devalued by this perception that the Lord Mayor's changing, but the role isn't changing. So ignoring all the noise around it, in terms of the decision itself, which bits of that decision, what's the controversy, what's the scale?
I was going to say, this is about the process, not about the decision.
But why is the decision coming to call in if the decision isn't significant enough to be for calling? Because you're saying it's controversial, you're saying it's political, you're saying it's impacting all wards. I'm asking which bit of this decision is any of those three things? Because I don't see any part of that decision that is controversial, is political, or is large, only the various comments made around it and the future. It feels like the next decision is a review of the role of the Civic Party. And that's the one that should come to this meeting if there's a problem at that point. But this isn't a review of the role. This is just making some limitations around governance, and that's it. So if there's a specific part of that I'm missing, what part is that? That's my question. Did you want to say this?
If one agrees with Councillor Rose on all those various premises, and I disagree with him on all of those, because I think they're all significant because of the role of Lord Mayor, on one particular aspect, the consultation is clearly utterly flawed. When we've had all the Lord Mayors of the past, all the sheriffs of the past that have got involved, all the people that have previous experience, but the Labour group's consultation was to say to one particular councillor, good news, you're going to be the Lord Mayor, and then here are our changes. What do you think of that? The idea that that acts as a consultation is beyond laughable in the extreme.
You may, yes.
This one's quick, I promise. It's only a 10 grand decision, reducing it for, well, 10 grand less than this year, 20 grand more than last year. So all you're doing is just tightening the limitations on what they can do. Why would that need to have wider consultation? I think there should be, based on the comments made, a review of the Civic Party role, the number of people, all that stuff. That deserves a proper consultation from day one with everybody who's been in that role. Why would this thing around governance is going to be through a formal organisation now, charitable? Why would that need to have this much broader consultation?
It is a review of the mayoralty and the Civic Party. It's talking about various aspects of what the mayoralty does. So that is a review. You might call it something else, but it is actually a review of what's happening with the mayoralty.
Councillor Mason.
Quickly on 10 grand decisions don't go to executive. You don't have the officers we have here tonight for a 10 grand decision. The council has a 148 million pound revenue budget and a vastly bigger capital budget. This is not a 10 grand decision. This is a fundamental start of a process of changing and downgrading the role of Lord Mayor. And it'd be interesting to see whether Labour members will put on record publicly what they say privately in some cases about a desire to downgrade the role of Lord Mayor.
Just to clarify, it was an executive member decision. It wasn't an executive decision.
I do apologise, but everything still applies for executive member decision as executives. 10 grand decisions do not routinely go to executive and have the officers that we've got here tonight to discuss it. It simply doesn't happen.
I'll give it.
Mason.
Just a brief point of order.
If you just want to, did you want to add anything to what we're not bringing in?
Yeah, I suppose going back to Councillor Rose's question, I suppose another example of a similar decision that goes to executive is that every year we just have a point system that tells us who the next Lord Mayor is. We think that's important enough to go to exec, just to know who the next Lord Mayor is. So we all know anyway, because we can all sit and add up the points, but we think that's important enough to go to exec.
So
I suppose in terms of some of those wider things you were saying about why is it important? Well, it reduces the number of events the Lord Mayor goes to, which is supported. You know, we'll agree a list at the start of the year of what you can go to in your chains. But if the primary school rings you up the next day and says, oh, actually, we forgot to get our year in advance booking for you to come to our school, well, I'm sorry, that's it. The Lord Mayor will come on the bus with all 4 of them in a special badge. You know, these are huge changes that affect people in our city that value the Lord Mayor.
Just to clarify, to avoid sliding into a debate about whether, well, there's a plan to abolish them, that we're not here to speculate and discuss what may or may not happen in the future. We're here to discuss the basis on which this set of decisions was made. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to make a couple of points of clarification, really, and thank you for that intervention. Firstly, Councillor Stewart, I don't think it's appropriate to be suggesting that privately you've had conversations with so-and-so who thinks so-and-so. I mean, that's not the way that we operate, and I don't think that this is the forum for doing so. Just in terms of the specifics of the decision, and again, I think Councillor Mason has repeated something which I think is a misunderstanding. My understanding of the decision here is that there are a series of annual events that happen every year, including going to the races 7 times during the course of the year, and that those annual events are seeking to be reduced, the number of annual events where it's expensive to take the roads out. The idea that you're not going to go to the school that picks up the phone and says, can you come and be involved in our civic democracy? There's nothing in the paper that I've seen that suggests that that won't continue to happen. So if you could point to me where that would where that would be reduced, I'd be interested to hear. But this is the sort of misinformation that seems to be being swirled around this decision, which I think you're agreeing with in terms of the principles of it around refining and
I think we all
being
think
clearer on the role.
But we all think there's great things that can be done with this office. I think in terms of what you're referring to, and again, I don't want to get into the actual decision that was made, but it clearly says what events support will be agreed for at the start of the year. And that is just not possible to do that. And particularly, you're not even letting the Lord Mayor make that decision. You're saying that the executive member and the officers will make that decision. That's what the decision note says. So you're removing that from the Lord Mayor, even the chance for them to be involved in the process for what events might come in that, on that annual cycle. We read the decision notice.
We've got some more hands of people who haven't spoken. We've got 2 minutes left, so I need to bring some people in. Councillor Fisher. All right. I'll go to Councillor Rose and then back to Councillor Healy.
Yeah, it's just a supplemental on that point that what was clearly said throughout this paper and clearly said at the meeting is that the number of events fluctuates wildly year to year and the cost fluctuates. And we see that with a 30 grand variation between 2 consecutive years here. And what we're saying is there needs to be framework around that in this decision. That's what it's doing. The same with usage of Mansion House, usage of transport, when the change should or shouldn't be used and all of that stuff. This is just saying it's been completely irregular for a very long time. And it's limited now. Was it 300 for one mayor, 600 events, 800 events, and some of the stuff that we've seen in terms of what people have said to us? You can still do 800 events. What it's saying is that the cost of rolling out the chains and having security around it, the cost of transport when we're not picking the cheapest transport, but we're spending, that's just got to be checked. And there's equality stuff in there to make sure that people who need a car more than other people have the car more than other people. That's what we're saying. So that's my question for you is which bit of this is the bit that is being cut on here? What is that? We're specifically talking about.
Again,
we're not. I'm not going to go into the detail of the budget because clearly that wasn't part of the original decision-making process. But the extra money actually relates to staffing because of a transfer between departments. It's nothing to do with the Lord Mayor incurring that cost. That's a transfer from when Democratic Services had it to the 2 different directorates when they moved staff across. It's but clearly,
I'm not accusing the Lord Mayor of overspending this year, and the call in is valid. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just which
sort of implication.
Why are we not referring to the decision and where it says something? That's why I'm asking.
1 minute left, so Councillor Healy, and then we'll wrap up.
This is a supplemental to Councillor Crawford's point.
The microphone.
Starting all over again, a supplemental to Councillor Crawshaw's point around the reduction in events attended, page 268, point 2, and seek to reduce the number of regular funded events by 25%. It then goes on page 271, paragraph 26. Given the need to reduce the mandatory and fixed budgets going forward, the council will support agreed annual events only, which has been reduced by 25%. It then goes on to say for all other events, the Civic Party will attend at their own cost and wear badges of office. So all those other events that they currently go to are picked up in this current last year's budget. So given the fact that it's 300, we've heard that they're 600 or 800, it's actually cutting out 500 events unless they are picked up by at their own cost, the Civic Party. The question is, do you agree with my analysis?
I think we do. I mean, clearly there's confusion, but if there was consultation, some of these points might have been teased out at the start.
Okay, that's us. Your 20 minutes Q&A over and done. Thank you very much. Councillors, if you'd like to return to the public gallery. Okay, so if I can invite Councillor Lomas and Councillor Douglas to join us at the table, please. So, thank you, members. So you will have 10 minutes to respond to the call-in in your own time, and then we'll similarly have a Q&A session following that. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to first correct some of the misinformation and misunderstanding that is still being spread by some of the people involved in this discussion. So, and I think that's important because it was clear during the original decision session that a lot of the people who had come to speak had misunderstood, misinterpreted, or been misinformed about what was actually in the paper. And you've just heard some of that confusion being spread again. So a few clarifications. Financial information. The list that was presented in the original papers was a list of events because it was the funded events that we were seeking some of the savings from. And I stress funded events, and I'd like you to interpret me as saying that in capitals. Funded events, not total events. So we provided a list of events and the cost of those events so that you had an indication of what it was that we were trying to achieve. During the decision member session, executive member decision session, sorry, there was a question from one of the public speakers who suggested that the £10,000 was a very high percentage of the budget, interpreting what had been presented as the entire budget. Officers in the meeting attempted to answer their question about the entire budget and said that they would provide more information separately, which is what they did. They provided that information separately, and it was later put into the public record so that everybody could see it. So that's why there were two sets of figures. There was no misunderstanding. We didn't think we were given something different. We knew exactly what we were looking at in that meeting. That was an attempt to answer questions which had been raised by members of the public in public participation. And I think it's entirely right and proper that if we don't have all of the technical information that people ask for in the meeting, that we provide it separately. Most of the comments that were made during that original decision session were due to a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation, misinformation about the plans. And that has been spread and has been repeated tonight. When those issues were addressed and the factual information given, all of the concerns fell away. And indeed, in the meeting, the representative from the Wilberforce Trust who spoke said afterwards that she hadn't properly understood and that she was satisfied. Similarly, some of the written representations, when we spoke to people and explained to them the factual information about what was actually being proposed, they were satisfied. Something on expenditure. Every year, a badge of office is presented to all members of the Civic Party in recognition of their service. That's incorporated into the budget every year. So the badge of office that we're talking about in this paper has already been incorporated into the budget. Fundraising. Councillor Orrell, again this evening, suggested that the Lord Mayor will not be allowed to choose the charities that they donate money to through their fundraising. I corrected this more than half a dozen times in the original decision session and have corrected it several times to several people who have approached me since. The Lord Mayor will continue to be able to choose whatever charities they like to receive donations from their fundraising. We are simply giving them a vehicle to be able to properly manage donations that are given, because the Lord Mayor's charity does not exist. In fact, the current Lord Mayor and Civic Party, they use Two Ridings Foundation, who manage the York Fund for us. They use Two Ridings Foundation as the vehicle for their charity donations so that they can be kept safe in terms of receiving money and then giving it out. All we are doing is codifying that in protocols and saying the Lord Mayor can choose whatever charities they like to be the recipients, but they will do so through an established, very well recognised organisation who will make sure that the Civic Party are kept safe in that. I think that's a good thing to do. We are just formalising the very good idea that the current Lord Mayor has had. Events. There is no suggestion that the number of events that the Civic Party will attend will reduce. The wording says funded events will be reduced by 25%. Funded events, not events, funded events. That is events where we have to pay for staff costs, for a chauffeur-driven limousine and other staffing costs. We are simply choosing to reduce the number of events where all of the regalia is worn. That doesn't mean we won't support the Civic Party to get to the events they need to go to. We just won't necessarily be providing a member of staff to drive them there. That means that the Lord Mayor will be able to do as many events as they wish to do. And we absolutely want them to continue to do community events. That is their purpose as the first citizen of York. But what we can't do is we can't carry on having an increase in funding year on year on year at a time where we are cutting budgets across the council. The way that it looks when a Lord Mayor turns up in a chauffeur-driven limo dripping with gold to a food bank, I think we have to think about that. We've also had mentioned tonight a new one, which is about the delay of the report. And that was simple, practical delay due to lack of officer availability, because we needed to make sure that we had the information and advice from officers that we needed in order to make our report, make our decision on the basis of their reports. Finally, we've had some questions about equality and a suggestion that we would not be taking equality into account. Of course we will. For every role that anybody undertakes within the council, reasonable adjustments are available and they are tailored to the person's specific individual needs. So it's not possible for us to list in some kind of shopping list sort of way what reasonable adjustments we might make for different people who will have very specific and individual needs. And just in the same way as specific and individual needs are met when anyone's doing any role, they will be met when doing a role in the Civic Party. So in summary, there are a few things that have been called out in the call-in. The key decision. We had advice from the monitoring officer that this was not a key decision because, and again, I want you to hear my voice in capital letters, there is not a significant impact on 2 or more wards. That was the wording that the monitoring officer sent to us. There is not a significant impact on 2 or more wards. All decisions will affect people in the city, but we have a schedule of what level those decisions are in order to try to save time and money. So there was not a perceived significant impact on 2 or more wards, and the monitoring officer said that that meant that it was not a key decision, and obviously £10,000 didn't meet the financial threshold either. And I would say that the only controversy about this has been stirred up by the misinformation that's been spread about what actually is in the paper and what the proposals actually are. And nobody outside of quite a limited group of councillors, ex-councillors, has contacted me about this at all. Consultation. These changes are of limited significance overall, and so they have limited impact on
1 minute to go.
On the residents who we provide services for. So we felt we'd done as much consultation as we needed to do to regularise protocols. I hope that I've answered all of the questions in the call-in, but obviously more than happy to answer questions on any of the detail or any of the elements, and especially if there's any other aspects of misinformation we need to clarify.
Thank you, Councillor Lomas. So, members, we have up to 20 minutes to ask any questions of Councillor Lomas and Councillor Douglas. I'll start with Councillor Rowley first.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Lomas, for presenting your response to the call-in. I'm just curious that in Annex A, which is the current annual civic events, there's a list there that is very comprehensive in terms of cost, and I'm just, for me, the question about is it a key decision, is it not a key decision, comes down to the monitoring officer and his interpretation of whether it is or it isn't, and the impact on wards and the finances. But just looking at Annex A of the current annual civic events, what would have been helpful, particularly for me at this meeting, there's a list of the events. You've already talked about the events that will not be funded. And clearly this is a list of events that are funded, but it doesn't indicate anywhere, unless I've missed it, which of these events would be axed moving forward. So I mean, is there a list somewhere that we would be able to look at and say, because for me that would help me to determine whether something was a significant change or not. So I'm just curious.
Yep, I think what you'll find in the paper is that there will be a discussion with the incoming Civic Party every year to agree what events are going to be funded and what events can be attended but won't be funded. So that's absolutely a discussion. And, you know, I think it is important that we note at this point that all we could do is give a snapshot of one particular year. Different years, there will be different combinations of events. There will be different events that have different levels of funding, because every civic party has a different focus and different set of priorities. And that is absolutely right and proper. And it would be completely improper of us to try and dictate which events should and shouldn't be supported. So that absolutely will be a discussion with the incoming Civic Party every year to identify their priorities and which are the things that they would want to prioritise. And I think, you know, you can see from there that there are probably some things where there are repeated trips to the same place. You might say we'd only fund one of those and not the repeat ones, and those would be done separately. There are all sorts of ways that you can reduce the number of events that are funded without too much difficulty, I think. But it's not, that wouldn't be for us to make a decision here and now about, because I'm not the Lord Mayor, you're not the Lord Mayor. The Lord Mayor needs to have some agency over that, because they will have their own views and priorities about what they think is the most important to the communities that they serve.
Follow up, yeah.
Thank you. This is probably my last question, really. So from what you've said, can we assume, and it's always a dangerous thing to assume, can we assume that you will protect the fact that those discussions will take place each year, that there's no mandatory striking out of any events, that the events calendar will be agreed? Because I think that was some slight misinformation, is that you know, these decisions will be taken by senior officers and an executive, and an incoming Lord Mayor will effectively be told what they're going to do and what not going to do. But you can clearly state that discussion is an open calendar, and the incoming Civic Party or Lord Mayor will be consulted, and that discussion will happen year on year on year.
I just need to clarify slightly that there are some events that are mandated for the Lord Mayor. So things like mayor making, for obvious reasons. Otherwise there won't be the mayor. And things like Remembrance Sunday, where they are set events in the civic calendar. So there are some things that we all will be expecting the Lord Mayor every year to be part of. It's the other events that they do have a choice in. You know, they have a choice where their priorities sit. And as several people have said this evening, the Lord Mayor is the first citizen of York. They have a duty to the people of York. And so they will need to look at where their priorities sit in their duty to the community.
Thank you. Councillor Rose.
Thanks. I think you know what question I'm going to be asking, which is, having heard my comments up to now, this for me it is an insignificant change. So why did it come to an exec member's decision session? Why wasn't it an officer decision? Why wasn't it in the budget when it came to budget around the same sort of time? Why didn't it go to full exec? Why that layer? And why wasn't there consultation if it's at that layer? What's the thinking around all of that?
There is, as you know, a great affection for the Civic Office in York. We all hold them dear, and we place a high importance on them. And so I think it would have been wrong of us to do this as a officer decision. We sought advice from the monitoring officer on whether it amounted to a key decision or not. Because we just weren't clear. We knew it didn't meet the financial threshold, but did it meet the significance threshold? The monitoring officer's advice was that it did not, because it didn't have, in his opinion, significant impact on 2 or more wards. And in his follow-up opinion, when we were asked questions about it and we asked him to clarify, he said that it doesn't matter if it becomes controversial or not. It is whether at the time he gives us that advice, it is his view that it will have a significant impact on 2 or more wards. And at the time he gave the advice, it would not. So therefore it came to exec member decision session. I'm very happy to be talking openly about the Civic Office protocols. I think it's something that's been kind of done behind the scenes for a long time. And it's something that doesn't get a lot of airtime. We all greatly admire the work that the Lord Mayor does. We all value it. We all want it to happen. But there's never been really anything written down about how it works or whatever. So the chance to actually write down some of the stuff that happens anyway, write down some of the ways that we're going to approach the current financial constraints of the council and apply them to the Civic Office. All of those things we absolutely wanted to do. And I think it's right to make decisions in public. And it was really interesting hearing the views of varying members of the public, most of whom had held council office or civic office in the past. But I have to say, it was really sad that most of them based their comments on misunderstandings and misinformation that had been somehow passed around. And we've heard more of that tonight.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you very much, Chair. You said, Councillor Owens, that the change of limited significance. I think that depends on, to some extent, on how you view the Lord Mayoralty. And I think we've heard from a lot of people who do think these changes are significant. But then to move on to the point of the consultation, you said you did as much as you felt you needed to. Could you just outline exactly who you did consult, how you consulted them, and when that consultation took place, please, in detail, so those around the table can be satisfied that you have satisfied point 4A, which is to consider the views of the public.
So consultation. Consultation. We obviously had consultation with the members of the officer corps who have been supporting the Lord Mayor in some cases for a very lengthy period of time, to make sure we understood what kind of protocols existed, even though they weren't written down, and what were the things that caused challenges for the Civic Office each year, bearing in mind every person who holds the office of Lord Mayor typically only holds it once. Some people hold it, twice or thrice, but that's very, very rare nowadays. So the viewpoints of officers who have supported the Civic Office over a great many years, who have experience of the different challenges that different civic parties have experienced, who have experience of how the civic offices have developed over time, was absolutely invaluable. and obviously contributed to, you know, some of the detail that was in the paper. I think also there's a crucial point around the civic office holders themselves not managing their budgets. They don't deal with the budgets. They don't deal with the decisions around how the costs are met by the organisation, and it is the officers' job to manage those budgets and try to make sure that everything can be done. And without protocols written down about how that's going to be done, that's incredibly challenging. I think one of the things that we were very mindful of is there's not a significant change to the role of the Lord Mayor and the Sheriff in this. The Lord Mayor remains the first citizen of York, the Sheriff remains the Sheriff of York. They retain their historic significance, they retain the titles, they retain all of the regalia that goes with their office. They retain the ability to attend events across the city and represent the residents of York. There are many things that are covered in here that are just writing down what already happens, regularising the arrangements that are already being made. There are things like making sure that everyone understands that the Lord Mayor doesn't have a charity. There is no such entity as the Lord Mayor's charity. They do fundraising, which is of great benefit to charities in the city, but they need a vehicle in order to do that safely and legally. And so we wrote down what that was, and we used what the current Lord Mayor was doing. So there's no significant changes, Councillor Fisher. So that's why we didn't consult, apart from with the officers that we needed information from. And of course, we did consult the incoming Civic Party to make sure that we hadn't missed anything that would be of importance to them.
Okay, I've got Councillor Healy with a supplementary, but you can go first, Councillor Fisher. Give me.
Thank you. So what you're actually saying is you didn't consult the public and therefore you failed 4A of the calling quite clearly. Is that what you're saying? You did not.
There was no requirement to.
Okay, Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. So just to clarify, what page 272, row 40, line 42 should say, consultation analysis, the incoming Lord Mayor-elect and the officers that support the Lord Mayoralty have been consulted on the board proposals. Are we now saying that consultation by asking staff members now meets the needs of consultation? Because I'm not too sure
There were no groups that were going to be significantly impacted by this, so there was no consultation to be done. We can't consult and say behind the scenes we're going to do something. Like if we were deciding, you know, something about the tables in West offices, we wouldn't do a consultation with the public. That's not how decision making works. We've gone above and beyond by making this decision in public, in order to, you know, recognise the importance of the civic office to the city. But where there's nobody to consult, then we don't consult.
Okay, Councillor Crawshaw to follow on.
Yeah, just linked, and I don't know whether it's for the exec members or possibly for Dawn to answer, but can we just confirm that this decision was made in a public session? The papers were published with 5 working days as per the legislation. Any member of the public could read the papers, could register to speak under public participation, and the exec member could take into account their views when making the decision.
Yes.
Just a quick follow-on question on consultation. Councillor Mason referred, when he saw the item on the forward plan, contacted officers to express an interest in being involved in whatever way would be appropriate. And from what he said, there was an inference that there was the opportunity for a consultation. Was there a discussion about what a an appropriate consultation might look like, and was it an active decision not to invite sort of pre-decision input from whether it's former civics or others?
I can't answer for a correspondence that Councillor Mason had with an officer that I wasn't party to. So I'm not able to answer to that in any way, I'm afraid, Councillor Fenton. But I am more than happy to clarify that I mean, it's usual for exec member decision sessions that there is no separate consultation other than what Councillor Crawshaw has just outlined, the decision being made in public, papers being published, people having the right to speak. We did have a number of I think we actually had our full complement of 10 public speakers at the decision session. And I don't know what more than that we could have done. There wasn't any discussion that I can recall about specifically consulting civic office holders. This decision doesn't affect them in any direct way, so I'm not sure why we would.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I think from on the topic of consultation, we've heard from public participation that we should be reviewing the roles, the size of the civic party, the impact of the YMCA mayor versus our right honourable Lord Mayor. For me, we should be consulting former role holders, and we should be doing that as soon as possible. And when you're talking about that engagement around events that will or won't be funded, and that's a future decision, not one that was made in this decision, but that feels again like an opportunity. We should be consulting people who have been to those events and know what the significance is. Is there plans in place for that consultation? I've got a follow-up about the decision specifically, but
that will be down to the incoming Lord Mayor, who will be having the discussions about what their priorities are in terms of the events that they want to particularly prioritise during the year. Of course, they have the opportunity to speak to any of the previous holders of the role of Lord Mayor, and I'm sure that those previous civic office holders would be more than happy to be supported. We've heard from lots of them at the original decision session and tonight. And I don't think there's one of them that wouldn't be pleased to be called upon by an incoming Lord Mayor for support in making those kind of decisions. I don't think it's for us to prescribe, however, because we are putting in place protocols that allow the incoming Lord Mayor to set their priorities. That happens every year. Every year, the incoming Lord Mayor sits down with staff and talks about what their priorities are and what kind of things they'd like to do. We're just writing it down.
And with hindsight,
Councillor Rowley next.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Councillor Lemons, I just want to come back to something that you'd said to me earlier. So you said to me, and I accept what you said, that the list of events, so we're coming back to the Annex A, the list of events would be finalised in consultation with the incoming Lord Mayor. Yet on the decision notice on page 262, it says the final list of events will be delegated to the Director of Customer and Communities in consultation with the executive portfolio holder, and should seek to reduce the number of annual regular funded attendance by 25%, which I get, but there's no mention in there of consultation with the Lord Mayor or the incoming Lord Mayor. Just slightly confused, that's all. And it might just be a clarification. That
we have made that clarification dozens of times, and I don't know how else to say it, that the only way that the incoming Lord Mayor's priorities can be decided is by the incoming Lord Mayor. If, however, there was, for example, an incoming Lord Mayor who declined to reduce the number of events that were funded, and we're saying no, they had to do 1,500 events in the year and all of them needed to be supported to the highest degree, then decision making would be delegated to the Director of Communities in consultation with the exec member, because we have to keep within budgets, and it is the officers who hold the budget, not the Lord Mayor, and so they have to be able to ultimately make that decision. It is currently the case that officers decide what ultimately the staff do, because it's officers who hold the budget and say, yes, we will make a member of staff available to do that particular activity.
Thank you very much. We're just hit our 20-minute mark, so thank you very much. Councillor Lomas, Councillor Douglas, you may now return to the public gallery. We're nearly there. We're nearly there. Request to open the window. Any veto of opening window? Okay. Can I ask Councillor, what lead calling member is that? Councillor Mason, to return to the table, please. In his own time. Okay, so Councillor Mason, you now have up to 5 minutes to make any concluding remarks. Please make sure you've got your microphone in front of you.
Yeah.
And it's switched on.
Super. Thanks, members. I'll just go through some points. Like we said, I think at the start, you know, this is great. It's been reviewed. We want to be part of that. We think there's a great amount we can share in terms of that experience. Like we said, there's only 3 members that have done it. And, you know, been there, done that, got the t-shirt and want to share that experience because we want other Lord Mayors or the Sheriffs to have a successful year and be great ambassadors for our city. And like we said, we think there's very clear savings that can be made, and it was a shame that they weren't kind of more articulately communicated. In terms of misunderstanding, I think that probably all comes down to consultation. I mean, we could have picked things up probably on both sides if we'd have all sat down and talked before this decision was made. In terms of cost of regalia and saying there isn't any, it's just going to be the current badges of office. I don't want to embarrass either the officer that's in the room or the executive member, but I've just listened back to the call and they describe in great detail the new badges of office will be larger, they'll be grander. So clearly we've either changed our mind or we were going to buy some new badges. So I'm not sure what's happened there in terms of within 2 weeks now backtracking on what that position was, but you only have to watch the webcast which Councillor Rose has to know that badges of office were definitely, special badges of office were definitely going to be produced. In terms of all funded events, I agree, I think it is confusing. We've already had some bits from the decision notice then, but it says quite clearly here, the council will provide support for set agreed events each year. For all other events, the civic party will attend at their own cost and wear badges of office. So it quite clearly says the council will provide support for a set agreed events. And it's just not possible. The civic party doesn't work like that. You know, who knows what's going to happen in a year? We definitely didn't know the king was going to come twice. You know, things change, and I'm sure there's always going to be those examples where, of course, we'll drop everything and make it happen. But actually, it's impossible to say what's going to happen and pin everything down for a year ahead. And I suppose there was other comments made about this is the first time we're codifying it. Well, there's been a civic handbook around for ages. It tells you what type of trousers to wear at what type of event. It tells you what's expected of you when you wear the robes, when the full civic party goes. It's all been there. And I think we all agree the civic support has been inconsistent and there's been lots of changes and it's moved from departments and had a lot of change over the last 10 years. And a lot of institutional knowledge has gone. And probably the people that have got that knowledge is ex-civics and people within that and the people that want to share it. So I suppose in summary, we think this is an important decision. There clearly is misunderstanding, but clearly the way to solve that is by consulting, sitting down, talking, thrashing it out and coming up with a paper that all sides see. This shouldn't be a political thing. It should be something we're all proud of, we all care about, we all want to be a success for our city and all work together on, and hopefully you'll all vote our way, we'll all start again and we'll have good consultation. But if that isn't the case, let's get a working group together. Many councils have civic subcommittees that deal with this type of stuff, deal with freedom of the city, deal with all these other things that are, as you say, sometimes not seen by the public and not understood. Let's produce a committee so we can all work together and manage the city's important civic life properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. I can invite Councillor Lomas to return to the table, please. And you will too have up to 5 minutes to make any concluding remarks.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted to hear that Councillor Mason wants to share the experience that he had as part of the Civic office, and that he wants future Lord Mayors to be successful. I think that's what we all want. And I'm grateful to him and the other ex-civics who have contributed to the discussions around this. Councillor Mason believes that the misunderstanding would have been picked up through a consultation. It could also have been picked up by reading the papers or listening to what we said during the exec member decision session, when over half a dozen times I clarified the point about fundraising, and it was still repeated tonight by 2 members who were in that decision session and heard me say that over half a dozen times. Councillor Mason thinks that we're confused about badges of office. We're not. I merely made the point that every year we purchase badges of office for the Civic Party. We're doing that the same. Yes, they're being redesigned, but we already have money allocated in the budget for that. And as we have repeatedly said, we want to bring the budget down, not increase it. Councillor Mason also mentions a civic subcommittee, which we don't have, and other councils absolutely do have. I think that would be an interesting thing to consider. However, I go back to my previous point. We are a council having to cut frontline services to our residents because of the financial situation we face. And I don't think that the vast majority of residents of the city would appreciate us setting up another committee which costs them money and takes money away from frontline services at a time when they're being asked to pay more for services and to reduce the level of service that they get because of the cuts. So while I think it's a great idea, I think it's something we'll have to consider very carefully in the context of our financial situation.
Thank you. You can return to the public gallery, sorry. Okay, so I would now invite any comments from members before we move to the vote. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's clear from all the discussions that we've had this evening that the role of the Lord Mayor is one that across party we want to protect and we want to ensure continues in terms of its standing within the city. I'm encouraged by the executive members' comments on several occasions about the importance of the Lord Mayor being the first citizen of York, and so I'm kind of encouraged by all of that. I guess for me the key thing for me is whether this was a key decision or not, and whatever's been said this evening, I believe, given the importance of the decision, for me, it's down to the monitoring officer's advice originally, which I happen to disagree with. So I believe it is a key decision, and notwithstanding everything that's been said this evening in terms of kind of the the replies and the questions that have gone on. So for me, it's down to it being a key decision, and I believe it is for a number of reasons, and that's kind of where I sit on the matter. Thank you. Yeah.
Any other comments from members? Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose there's a few comments I'd make. First point, really, just when we're thinking about the call-in, obviously the Constitution requires us to meet every single one of these tests for the call-in to be upheld, and I think it quite clearly doesn't meet a number of them. I disagree with Councillor Rowley. I think one of the reasons why we have a monitoring officer is to take the politics out of some of those decisions, and actually if the monitoring officer has determined it's not a key decision, it's not a key decision. In my experience, monitoring officers tend to err on the side of caution. So I think if there was a sense that it was in any way contentious, actually, they would be saying, yes, no, take that as a key decision. I think that within the framework of the decision making, it's quite obvious to me that all the points at 4A and C have been made appropriately for a £10,000 non-key decision to go through a public session and allow people to be able to comment and all the rest of it. I don't see any way that you would uphold any of that. And likewise on the decision being contrary to the general policy framework. Again, I fail to see any way that it meets that. So in that sense, I just don't see that there's any substance to the call-in. However, I would invite people to reflect on the damage that has been done to the office of the Lord Mayor through the misrepresentation of this very, very small decision. This ended up on national radio because of decisions or you know, a political expediency that sought to turn a very minor codifying of rules to take a £10,000 out of a £135,000 budget. And that ended up all over the place. And, you know, the comments that were being repeated at the start of this session from members of the public, I'm not surprised that members of the public thought that the Lord Mayor was going to be removed. I saw one comment talking about, oh, the Mansion House is going to become a hotel because it's not going to be used. I mean, the level of misinformation around this minor decision is quite staggering. And I do think that people need to just tone things down a little bit on some of these decision making, because this is pretty minor stuff. Just in terms of some positive suggestions, maybe in terms of going forward, former councillor Barbara Boyce talked about the need to maybe make this a more modern role and the secularisation of the role. I think I would take the view of saying, actually, you know, that connection with the interfaith group in the city is really important, and being clear that we're there, the role represents all the faith groups and none in the city, I think is really important. And just from a ward perspective, when we're looking at the ways in which perhaps we need to reduce the number of funded opportunities for the Lord Mayor to be going out, the idea that the limo is driving through South Bank to the races 7 times a year at the cost of nearly £1,200, I'd be very happy to walk the Lord Mayor if they're able to walk through South Bank. I'll take them down to the entrance to the racecourse, show them the way in. Not saying you don't go to the races 7 times. If you want to go to the races 7 times, it's a great event, but there's no need to drive there unless your physical situation requires it. So I think there's some quite obvious ways to make these savings, but let's just dial it down, because I think it's been very clear this evening that everybody supports the office of Lord Mayor, but I do think it's been damaged by this episode.
Thank you, Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. Picking up the comments from Councillor Lomas, if the monitoring officer has basically said that this doesn't affect more than one ward significantly, thank you for that contribution from the public. I can't see it, sorry. Sorry. Anyway, oh, it's totally thrown me off my thoughts. Oh, and the monitoring officer has also said to Councillor Lomas that it doesn't meet that the consultation was fine. And also, if the monitoring officer has said the financial details were adequate, what I then don't understand is why the monitoring officer then said the call-in form raises prima facie questions of compliance, which could form the basis of an arguable case. So the monitoring officer seems to have wasted all of our time here, because
I don't think the monitoring officer was commenting on the strength or otherwise. I think he was saying it was a legitimate call-in, not really commenting on the on its merits necessarily. He's not here to. He's
not here. I will put that to him separately, but
okay. Dawn.
Sorry, can I just have something? Because I'm not clear. I don't know whether other officers present in the room are, but I'm not clear whether the monitoring officer has specifically commented on the consultation process. That was one thing you mentioned. You know, so I wouldn't want that to be on record as, yes, he's definitely said, because I'm not clear that he has been asked about that or that he's commented on it.
Influences for the details, reason for the call-in, and then to the tick boxes and consultations.
Few observations from me. I think it was helpful that the financial information was made public, but if it was a commitment was made at the decision session to make further information available, I would have expected it to have been published as an addendum to the papers for that meeting. I think it was unhelpful for it to be published as an agenda supplement for this meeting, because it does cause that tension with what we're told we have to do, which is to consider the original report to the executive. And so whilst information of itself is helpful, it has muddied the waters somewhat. I think all the discussion around key decision, I think it's clear there has been significant public interest. Whether you, yeah, I agree in terms of significant impact on the council. When you think of the breadth of the council services, that's a more difficult case to argue. In terms of significant public interest, which I'm sure I'll be corrected, but I think that's one of the considerations when deciding is it a key decision or not. It has attracted significant public interest, and I think that's partly because the paper was published for the decision session, and I think because, and as Councillor Lomas has said, it required a fair bit of discussion and explanation at the decision session itself to clarify, well, what does that mean and what does it not mean? That to me, that's how we've ended up where we are. And I you know, in terms of what a consultation may have looked like prior to that decision session, I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with the world of the Civic Party as to who might have knowledge and information that could have helped sort of fine tune some of the proposals in the report. But it's clear that we've all developed an understanding of what it means and what it doesn't mean. But there was that period when I think, because I read it, and the way I read it turned out, well, that wasn't what was intended. But that wasn't on my part, sort of trying to, thinking, how can I make mischief with this? I genuinely didn't understand what the consequences would be, but now I have a better understanding. So I think the decision and that decision session could have been a different and better, potentially more sort of consensual discussion if there had been whether you call it a consultation or some kind of informal engagement. I think that could have really benefited us all and sort of prevented what subsequently happened, which was a significant public interest, which in the monitoring officer's opinion was never likely to occur. And I think that was perhaps slightly wishful thinking on his part, or naivety, one or the other. But there you go. Would anybody else like to say anything else? Councillor Rose.
Thank you. Yeah, look, we're lucky to have a right honourable Lord Mayor in the city. We shouldn't be talking about cuts when we're codifying stuff. We should be keeping in trend what we do today. But we have a national government that's making us cut things we don't want to cut. That's where we're at. The title and traditions and role in the city stay the same as they have done for centuries. The new YMCA mayor threatens this, but this decision doesn't. Personal use of the Mansion House doesn't currently use a budget. That doesn't change. Transport costs are being managed with reasonable adjustments to ensure no impact on inequalities. Special responsibility allowances are entirely preserved. Multiple people are confused about what allowances are reducing, but they're not the money the person actually receives for the role. And the new badges will cost the same as the old badges, so there's no change there on finance. Mayors can basically still do what they like. What the council pays for is made consistent and limited and made more transparent. The Lord Mayor charities have a better mechanism for safer governance. Costs will be about 10% less than this year, 20% more than previous years. Limits on driver security, international travel costs. So it's not significant or controversial. It's only political because after it became a talking point initially due to innocent misunderstandings, it then sort of got made political. With hindsight, probably more consultation would have been good. It would have avoided the misunderstandings. It probably would have avoided this meeting, would have helped us work together cross-party, but it wasn't a requirement and it wasn't part of what's needed for the decision to be made. In terms of the information given, everything needed is in that report. It says how much each change will cost or save, Annex A has a breakdown, as we've heard, around all that financial detail. More detail was given at the meeting, and then now we've got this extra paper that gives even more detail because it was requested at that meeting, even though it wasn't necessary for the decision. What equalities is covered in the paper and was covered in the meeting. Both exec members in the meeting asked loads of questions, many based on the public participation questions, to make sure the answer was given, sometimes, you know, half a dozen times, about specific points we've heard again. And it's interesting that, for example, the press didn't pick up any of the questions around the flex that we've had historically, where there's potential questions around how money was collected and spent for charity or public assets and finance and all that sort of stuff. But they were useful conversations for why this regulation, the formalisation, is needed. There's no change to the role or importance of the Right Honourable Lord Mayor, no change to equalities, etc. It doesn't change the Mansion House current use. So for me, it doesn't impact any of the wards in a meaningful way. I think, unlike Martin, I think it is clear it's not a key decision, but for me, it wouldn't be something that should go to exec member decision in the first place. And in both instances, I think actually that's not the question. The question is what was advised by the monitoring officer. They made that decision. The decision made by exec was then made appropriately. It's not really important if there is some secret scheme about future things, but just for the record, I've never heard of any secret scheme, and I think it is of vital historical importance, this role to the city. So look, it might not sound like it, but I do think members should bring things to call in if they think it is necessary, if they think it's justified. Better consultation was possible. I really hope that we get more consultation on this topic going forward. The Civic Party reviewed which events should be funded. I think equalities can be spelled out more. But these are issues that have come across multiple call-ins. And for me, this should be coming to audit and governance. Consultation papers, level of detail, equality impact assessments. It came to decision making came to AMG a fortnight ago. I spoke on it and the Lib Dems president didn't speak on it. And it's not a dig, but this is something we should be bringing back to AMG. I think we should be asking the chair of AMG to bring back this type of decision making, the repeat call-ins. There's clearly something that isn't quite working, whatever that may be. And I think we should also do what the public participation said and review the role in its entirety beyond what's currently written in the papers. Yeah, that's what I say.
Thank you. Anybody else? No, I think we've exhausted the topic and ourselves. Okay, so it's voting time again. So I will hand over to Dawn and she will ask you to indicate whether, having heard the discussion and debate, you believe there has been a breach or no breach of the decision-making protocol.
So this time now I know we're doing it this way, Chair. We'll do it alphabetically and we'll do you at the end as we normally would. Okay. So Councillor Baxter.
No breach.
Councillor Burton.
No breach.
Councillor Clark.
No breach.
Councillor Crawshaw.
No breach.
Councillor Fisher.
Breach.
Councillor Healy.
Breach.
Councillor Knight.
Breach.
Councillor Rose.
No breach.
Councillor Rowley.
Breach.
Councillor Steels-Walshaw.
No breach.
Councillor Taylor.
No breach.
Councillor Wan.
Breach.
Chair.
Breach.
Okay. Six.
So that's 7 no breach, 6 breach. So now let's have a show of hands to confirm what we've just decided.
Please do.
So all those who believe there's been no breach, please raise your hands.
7.
And those who believe that there has been a breach, please raise your hands. 6. Yeah, we're consistent. Okay, so before we finish, are there any other recommendations beyond Councillor Rose's suggestion that this be considered further by A&G? Councillor Rowley.
Yeah, I mean, it is a suggestion. I've got to say that, you know, we've all expressed how important the role of the Lord Mayor is. And I just think whether it's just an agreement or whether it's something more formal, but I think if the discussions within an executive of the Lord Mayor occur, I think just out of courtesy, some consultation with group leaders should take place. Not to say I've been wide, but just out of courtesy and collegiate working, there should be some consultation with group leaders.
Okay, well, forest of hands, councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one before he leaves the room. For councillor Orrell's benefit, as well as everybody else, I think it would be helpful for a myth-busting briefing note to be circulated amongst all councillors to share with the millions of people who've approached them with their concerns about what's going to happen to this role. It might just put their minds at ease slightly.
Okay. And I saw another hand, councillor Crawshaw.
Yeah, just a quick couple of points. Obviously, it's great if the group leaders will speak to each other privately. That does require the leaders of all the groups to engage in a meaningful way with group leaders, and my understanding is that to date that is not happening from the opposition group leader. I think just a general point around call-ins and decision making. I disagree with Councillor Rose respectfully. This doesn't need to go to AG. I think what needs to happen is when a published report made public on the council's website is there for all to see, if members are not clear on the meaning of that report, they write to the report author or the exec member and they seek clarity before going to the press and whipping up a firestorm, because that's what's happened with this very, very small decision. And I think that people do need to reflect on the way that we make decisions in this council. And if we want to have that collegiate approach to sharing information and speaking beforehand and taking on board the idea that this is supposed to be a politically neutral role in this specific case, then actually a little bit of grown-up discussion and speaking to each other goes an awful long way.
Anybody else like to make any other suggestions or recommendations? No. Okay,
Sorry, Chair. Can I just be clear whether you are as a committee and not as individual members just suggesting various things, whether you are agreeing any further decisions?
Well,
because read the group leaders thing, for example, that would be a recommendation, obviously. You can't force, sorry, I thought I'd ended that. You can't force them to come to the table on it. You can ask, for instance. So,
I mean, personally, I think engagement in any way, shape, or form is positive in terms of where there are decisions which, whilst maybe not have a large financial impacts, it would benefit from some informal discussion beforehand. But I think it requires a degree of confidence to be built, and I don't really think we need to have that discussion here now at 10 to 9 on a Monday night. It kind of pains me to say I don't think there's a form of wording we could come up with now that I think everybody would readily agree to. But there is clearly an appetite amongst some members to have an input, whether it's through A&G or some other forum, maybe not a civic affairs committee, but through some mechanism where members they have an interest and an enthusiasm for that to have an outlet somehow. I don't think we need to tie ourselves in knots about what that should be.
I think probably further to that, what I might say, Chair, is that I would imagine that if there is to be any review or creation of any civic protocols, that would have to come through a formal route in any event at some stage, and that would be the time at which to.
Yeah, and whether that would be A&G, the SMC, something else, I don't know. We don't need to decide that, but I think we're clear that as and when that does happen, members would like input in some way, shape, or form, whether that's through members can, we do have task and finish groups. We do meet and we do work informally as well as through public meetings. But I think as much the discussion that can be held formally, the better. But that's not to preclude working together outside of that. Okay. Right. Shall we call it a day? Thank you everybody for your patience and your perseverance.